Okay, let's go ahead and start, and we're just going to first do just a brief meditation to refresh our bodhicitta motivation. So maybe just start with it, just an immense feeling of joy and gratitude at being able to study this text due to the kindness of the Buddha, who began disseminating these teachings in our era in this world. But then all the great practitioners who kept these teachings alive, particularly the Mahayana teachings, all the way to Master Shantideva, who wrote the text that we're studying, who cultivated these realizations of these practices of a bodhisattva, and thereby wrote this amazing text that we can study and practice. And all the great gurus who have lived since then, who have continue to expound upon Master Shantideva's wisdom. Even our own gurus that we've received teachings on this text from. And think that we're indebted to these beings immensely. All their incredible kindness in allowing us to practice the Dharma in this way. All the way back to Shakyamuni Buddha. And then from that place of joy and gratitude, developing the wish to use this time then most beneficially to, in a sense, please the gurus, please Shantideva, please the Buddha, by turning our attention to this text so that we can practice exactly as these great masters of the past have done. This is the greatest gift we can offer to them, is our own wish to become just like them. In other words, our gift of bodhicitta, our desire to fully ripen our own minds, so we can then help to fully ripen the minds of others. Okay. Sounds good. All right. So, dare I ask if there are any more questions? Okay, let's move forward. We are still in the section on regret, on this repudiation or regret, because this is a rather long section, lengthy section, in terms of really giving us that force of trying to be wholehearted in this first of the four opponent powers. So let's go to verse 34 and 35. So again, you have that in the translation by Ziggy. We'll read that. Leaving all behind, I must depart alone. Through not having understood this, I committed various kinds of negativities for the sake of my friends and foes. Even my foes will become nothing. My friends will also become nothing. I too will become nothing. Likewise, all will become nothing. So this is another little teaching on impermanence, that all the things that we've tended to rely upon, and again in that third section of the death meditation, we look at those three. Our own resources, all the things that we possess, our body that we've had with us throughout this life, that we are very dear, or we hold very dear and cherish greatly, and then our friends, the people in our lives who have been our companions in this life. All of these have to be left behind. And so here it's focusing mostly on friends and even non-friends, enemies, what have you, difficult people. All of these things that we've had experiences with in this life, all these people will become nothing, go out of existence. And because that existence that they are, just like the existence we are now, will be gone at the end of this life. Our consciousness goes on, and we certainly have to go deal with all the consequences of what we've done in this life due to our attachment to friends and so on, or our aversion to non-friends, to enemies. So this is the gist of this, is to really, having regret for having created negativity for the purpose of friends, relatives, body, and possessions, not knowing that they are unreliable, is the way this is headed up in this commentary by Gyaltsen. So top of page 15, after the verses, it says, leaving everything behind, such as friends, possessions, and even the flesh and bones I was born with, I have to depart alone to the other side. Not understanding this, I generated many negativities because of protecting friends and destroying enemies. This I regret. It is unsuitable to create negativity for the purpose of non-friends, friends, and oneself, as all three become non-existent immediately afterwards. Similarly, relatives, possessions, and the like also become non-existent. They are completely unreliable, and any negativity done for their sake out of attachment or anger is regrettable. So this is the nature of our existence, right? Everything that we rely upon, depend upon, has that transitory nature, all going out of existence, yet we cling to it as if it is so real and so substantial and hang on to it in that way. Tokme Sangpo, the great Bodhisattva who wrote the 37 Practices of a Bodhisattva, in one of those verses he alludes to the fact, he calls this life as being like, we're like a guest in a guest house. You know, like we sort of check in to this existence in this body, and we don't recognize that it's just a place we're staying for the time being, and then we move on. You know, if you look at your logic, the logic of this, if you went to a guest house or a hotel room, you're traveling, you go to a hotel room, you don't get attached to it, right? Because you don't like go out and buy a new furniture and everything and replace everything that's in the hotel room with all these wonderful things that you can enjoy for your few nights that you're there, because you know that you're only there for that short time. Well, here, because we have this illusion that we're here for such a long time, it's really just a snap of the fingers, a flash of lightning, as they were saying earlier. And then we're gone, we're on our way. Well, why do we do that in this life? Why do we get so attached to all the stuff we fill our lives with, all the things, all the people, all the, even this body? We spend so much time caring for these, but then we also, as is pointed out here, engage in negativities in regard to them, in order to have them, in order to protect them, in order to keep the negative things at bay. So then we have another section to this. This is the example of how they become a mere object of memory at the death time. Let's read verse 36. Just like an experience in a dream, whatever things I enjoy will become a memory. Whatever has passed will not be seen. So at that point, everything that you experience, it's like a dream. You can't sit there and go, oh yeah, I'm going to be back in that moment when I enjoyed this or what have you. And instead, everything is gone. It's all a memory at that point, just a memory. Gyaltsab says on page 15, for example, the minimal happiness experienced during a dream is only the object of memory after we wake up. Similarly, the objects that we fantasized to be happiness at first and which we engaged in are at the time of death but a mere memory. Therefore, one should make repeatedly the decision to practice the Dharma right now. One by one, everything becomes past and unobservable, to be just a mere object of memory. So this is the truth about all things that we have in this life. Everything is, just like a dream, here for a while, and then we wake up and it's gone. And in this case, we're waking up at our death. We're coming to that reality that everything that we had was just a memory. Nothing goes with you, other than, of course, what you've done with this mind, with the qualities you've developed or the negativities that you've created. And so here, that's the important thing we're focusing on, is to make sure that we don't create so much negativity on the basis of things that are that transitory. Because it just doesn't make sense that we put all that energy into something that is gone like that. That is just a memory. Verse 37, this outline heading is regretting having generated negativity for them, although seeing now directly their unreliability. So let's read that verse together. Even within this brief life, many friends and foes have passed away, but whatever terrible negativities I committed for them remains before me. So this is the conclusion we come to, as we recognize, okay, all these things are passing away to becoming mere memories, but something does linger. It's the smell of our bad actions, that we have to continue to be with. All of that stays with us. That isn't a memory. Instead, we have the force of that remains with us. So Gyaltsab Je says, further, even during the short time we are alive, we know from experience that many friends and non-friends have passed. Since the frightening fruitional result of the negativity that we created for their sake still remains before us, it cannot be shared by others. Hence, what use are obstructing friends? So why put up all of our energy again into that when all we can show for it, in a sense, are the negativities we've created? Now again, obviously, this is focusing on that side of it. We do have people in our lives. Our friends are often a good support for us to practice virtue. They're the people that we try to take care of, that we give advice to, that we help when they need assistance, what have you. But nonetheless, all the negativity that we create for their sake, due to our attachment to them, due to our aversion to the people who are enemies and so on, all of that we just simply have to endure. And no one else can bear that burden for us. That's what we've created ourselves. And that's what will remain from those relationships. So he says, one should contemplate this again and again, according to the way it is taught, and generate regret for the negativity done for their sake. Last point. The last outline in this section says, regretting having generated negativity by not realizing the uncertainty of the time of one's death. This kind of is jumping around these death meditation points that we talked about earlier. Now we move from the third set of three, where we're looking at what will be helpful at the time of death, and we're jumping back to the uncertainty of the time of death. So let's read verse 38. Thereby, through not having realized that I will suddenly vanish, I committed many negativities through ignorance, attachment, and hatred. So this is a bit of a reflection back to where we started some of this dialogue and getting into the subject of death. But this is the reality that we're at. We've created negativity for the sake of all this transitory stuff. And we have to be concerned about that, because death can happen at any time. And when death does happen, if we haven't purified all of that, then we have to face the consequences of all those actions. Gyaltsab says on top of 16, in this way it is explained that I am adventitious with a mere brief life where the time of death is uncertain. Not realizing this, I created a multitude of negativities out of ignorance, attachment, and anger. And then this is the whole crux of it. Because negativity causes downfall into the hells, one should meditate on regret many times for having created negativity. By contemplating the certainty of death, the uncertainty of the time of death, and that at the time of death only Dharma is of benefit, as well as the faults of the lower realms. Recall that that's the next topic, the 4 topics of the small scope. The very first one is death and impermanence, and you do the death awareness meditation to heighten that recognition that death can come at any time, and we need to be concerned about that moment. And then we go on to meditate on the lower realms. Why? Because the whole impetus of the small scope is to get you to be concerned about your next existence. So then you reflect upon the suffering of the hell realms and the suffering of the pretas and the suffering of the animals, and you become convinced that it is not a place you want to end up for even a second. Then you need a refuge. We talked about refuge earlier today. Refuge is the answer to the dilemma we find ourselves in, this life coming to an end at no particular certain time, and we will have to face the lower realms if we haven't done what we need to do. Therefore, we need safe protection. That first level of fear that we generate for refuge is having dread or apprehension of the lower realms. Then, based on our refuge, we follow the Dharma of Karma, the Dharma of Karma. Because we have to get that bit of Dharma first, which is that we have to be very meticulous in tending to our actions, to avoid any non-virtuous actions. What's that wonderful line we read at the beginning? Do not commit any non-virtuous actions, perform only perfect virtuous actions, and of course, purify what you can of the negative actions that you've done. Those are the basic teachings. Then we go on, as that verse talks about, to pacify our minds thoroughly, tame the mind, subdue the mind thoroughly. That's deeper work. Initially, we have to stop doing all the things that propel us into these lower states. So this was just Gyaltsab J reiterating the essential points of the death awareness meditation that will help you to have that immediacy to wanting to purify. Now we're going to the 4th topic in this whole section on regret, which is considering the way negativity is frightful. And the first point is, since nothing can be added to life and it runs out continuously, one is definite to die. And if one were to die with negativity, it is fearful. So he hasn't quite made the point yet. I guess he's going to keep rubbing our noses in it a little bit more. Here, Shantideva is kindly giving us this advice, you should generate some real fear, some trepidation about the negative actions you've created and what they could be creating for you in terms of suffering. So let's read verse 39. Remaining neither day nor night, this life is always slipping by and never lengthening. Why will death not come to one like me? So this is a little verse you could put on a Post-it and put it there like when you first wake up every day, right? Remaining neither day nor night, this life is always slipping by. That was one of the points in the 9-point death meditation. Under death is certain, they say, it's every single moment. One analogy that's useful is the hourglass. That there's sand grains in the top of the chamber that are continually going through into the bottom chamber. Of course, we like to think there's lots and lots, that the top is heavier than the bottom. We don't know when we're even halfway. We have no idea when we're halfway because it's not certain. But this is happening regardless of how many grains are in the top chamber. It's continually going. We can't plug it up for a few minutes, and say, okay, stop, time out. It's always going. And, there's nothing that we can add to our lives. There's nothing that we can kind of continue to make our lives longer and longer. And we do long life practices and initiations and things like that, but those are mostly to remove the causes of having your life end prematurely. The amount of life that we have is fixed based on the karma we created when we came into this existence. It's a little strange concept, but nonetheless, we can't really have things that go beyond, what would be the duration or the length of this life. But things can interrupt that. Things can come in and cause a premature death in that regard. You have a question, Jennifer?
About the death. So does that mean that an omniscient being would know when we're going to die?
Sure.
That obstacle still comes.
Yes. I even heard of one teacher who told his students when he was going to die. I don't know if he died on that day, I'm not sure, but yeah. Now, whether they share that information is, always questionable. Yeah, he told his students when he was going to die. He didn't tell them when they're going to die. That would maybe not be the... it could be really useful. If somebody knows that, guess what? You only have like 2 months left. You better get on the stick because...
There was a comedy hack day which they created
Yeah.
that would predict your death.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Well, there's even a website called the Death Clock or something that Dr. Nick told me about. Anyway, he at this website you put in, it's a health website to get you to keep an eye on all these various things that. Anyway, you put in your age and your weight and all this other stuff, and and then it comes up with an estimated time of death, and you watch it, and it's ticking by, second by second, minute by minute, showing how closer you are getting to death. But that's based on these statistics. It's not based on any kind of insight or knowledge. I don't think the guy who put that program together has any idea, when people will actually die. But sure, lamas would have information. Especially if they are Buddhas, well, then they know everything. All phenomena of the future they even know. It's not that they're blind to things because they are future phenomena.
How do they know the future if the future is changeable?
Because they know the changes that we'll make on the basis. I don't know. I always struggle with this one. But it does say that the qualities of a Buddha are that a Buddha knows all phenomena of the past, present, and future. I don't ask me how they can possibly, it just seems like everything is so variable. I don't want people to take that as it's predetermined then. It's not predetermined by the virtue of the Buddha knowing it. It's just that the Buddha knows all the various iterations and possibilities, and I guess knows the ones that we will take on the basis of our own mental development or whatever. I don't know. I'm just guessing. I think it's a really hard one to get our heads around. There's a book where I got some of this from, and he talks about it as being a dilemma. I can't remember the author's name. I can't even remember the title of the book now. Something like Being Buddha. I think it's called Being Buddha. And it's one of these theses or something that somebody did for some degree somewhere, and they published it as a book. Pretty sure that's the title of it, Being Buddha. Yeah, Jacqueline.
Our karma is fixed.
The length of your life was already determined by the karma that propelled you into this existence. Yeah.
So the length of my life is fixed.
It's determined. Yeah, fixed makes it sound like, again, there is a limit to this life in terms of the karma that you created to be born as human in this body that you chose through your karma. And so your karma with this body there is a limit. It could be earlier due to all the various causes of premature death. You can look some of this up too in the Lamrim Chenmo. Lama Tsongkhapa talks about all the causes of premature death. Well, if it's premature, it means prior to some time that you would normally live to. And that is not based on, the national average or something. It's based on your own karma. Yeah, go ahead.
But since karma is changing from the actions that we do,
But you've already created the karma for this life with its duration, and it's already ripened into that result. It would be like me trying to get a different rebirth in this life from purifying my karma. It's not going to happen because I'm already in this rebirth. And so with this rebirth is the length of life of this rebirth.
So the work you do in this life is really about duration and potential of future.
Exactly. Yeah.
Doesn't change.
Yeah. I mean, and so again, all these other practices, and why you still should do purification is because you may have other factors that could cause premature death, that could cause you to die before the duration of this life is exhausted. Because there's certain merit that we've created that has caused the life to be so long, and that merit can be exhausted by various factors or can be, interrupted. But what you've done in the past that created this rebirth also created the duration of this life. That's at least my understanding. I don't know. Has anyone heard anything contrary? I don't know.
But no extension, basically. Like long life.
Well, now, I don't want to make it sound absolute because they say that if you practice like even the lower tantras, the action tantra, you can gain these abilities to have longer lives so that you can actually sustain this life in some ways. But that's only through tantric practice. A sutra presentation in terms of karma, no. I'm sorry, I should make that clear, yeah. Yeah, but white Tara, what I've heard mostly around even those that are called long life empowerment, those are different than what I'm talking about, which is practicing action tantra and gaining these siddhis that allow you to actually extend your life. That's a very different karma. So, within tantric practice, yeah, if you gain some realizations, the siddhis that are the common siddhis, not the uncommon ones, then I think you can. I'm not sure. I have to look at the exact specifics of how you do that. But yeah, they do talk about in the tantric teachings about how you're able to, extend your practice by extending this life. But it's not just through an initiation or something. It's through deeper practices. Yeah.
So within the sutra, that's where they say it's the determination.
Yeah. That's my understanding, is that there's nothing in the sutra teachings that allows you to change the duration of this life. Jennifer has some questions.
Oh, no.
I can tell.
Oh, it's very deep. It's helpful. Now there was Venerable Amy was leading a death meditation at Garrison, and it's the one like where you were walking and it's a step closer to death. But for whatever reason, whatever came in my mind was not. It was a shift, and it was more like you're changing all the time, and you're going to go through a really big change in the future, and however you're thinking and doing as you're walking will determine what that change is in the future, what that change looks like.
Sure.
And it stopped becoming scary. That was the interesting thing. It was like, to me, it was a more gentler way of looking at death and karma. And I don't know if that would, I would think it would have validity, but it was so helpful for me because as I tried to get rid of the fixed eye, and it's like, well, you're always changing, things are always changing, and so there's going to be a really big change, and make sure that the change is good, and that was sort of the message.
Right. And and the change that we can still affect certainly is where we're at spiritually at the time of death, because that's totally in our hands. Are we going to approach our death when it comes and be at peace and feel confident that we've done what we can to assure a good rebirth and to continue our path and hold thoughts of bodhicitta in the midst of this body, losing its ability to sustain life and so on. So I don't know. But my understanding is, that you still, the changes are different. You can't change everything. Even Geshe Sopa in his Lamrim Chenmo commentary, he says, once a karma has come into place, the result has come into fruition, it's very hard, if not impossible, to change it. What we're mostly doing in purification is trying to change the things that are still in the works, that haven't come into ripening yet. And again, the point I was making is that by virtue of the karma you created for this life, you already have a karma in terms of how long this life will be sustained. And it's just karmically determined. It's not, again, definite in other ways. It's a product of the karma you created for this life, because you've also created the karma to have certain genetics, to have certain health issues in this life. Those are all things, but what you do with that and how you work with that, is up to you. But the sustainability of this body for this life is determined. I was going to try to find the section in the Lamrim Chenmo where he talks about this. It's in the karma section, I believe. But I may do that during the break, because otherwise we're going to end up wasting some time. So I'll see if I can locate that. Let's go on then to verse number 40 and 41ab. This is that second section that if we don't purify negativity, we have to experience suffering even in this life, because obviously some karma ripens in this life, potentially. So again, verse 40 and first two lines of 41. While I am lying in bed, although surrounded by my friends and relatives, the feeling of life being severed will be experienced by me alone. When seized by Yama's messengers, what benefit will friends and relatives afford? So there are three sections to this, subsections to this. The first one is if one does not purify one's own negativities, then one's friends and relatives cannot rescue us from the suffering of the life force being cut. It's up to us to have done that purification. Your friends and relatives aren't going to be able to do anything to help you at that time. So if one does, Gyaltsab Je says on the top of 17, if one does not create merit, then at the time of death, when I am lying on my deathbed, although friends and relatives surround me with their affection and sorrow, I will have to experience by myself alone the suffering feeling of having my life force cut. Not only is there nothing to alleviate my fear, but what use are friends and relatives against the minions of the Lord of Death when he holds my frightened flesh? They are of no use. Only the Dharma can rescue us at that time. So this is a bit of that, recognition that friends and relatives, as much as we depend upon them in this life for various things, become quite useless at the time of death. Yeah, Richard?
Yeah. The Gyaltsab Je's commentary seems to imply that if one does not create merit, I will experience the suffering feeling alone. I will experience, and that's implying that if I do create merit, that my friends and relatives will somehow or another be able to share.
Yeah, I don't know if that's how we should read this, though. I mean, I agree, the way that it's worded in terms of the translation and everything. I think he's trying to get at the fact that when we're being separated from this life, the feelings that we'll have, which will be suffering feelings of the mental anguish of having to do all of that, that can be overcome again by meritorious thoughts and meritorious actions, because as I was saying earlier, that's what we can change about our death, is when we get to death, I think he's just using the example that...
So it's an artifact of the translation.
Yeah, I think it is. Let me go to the other commentary that I used previously and see if it says something more akin to that. This was verse 40, right? So he says, if I have not created merit while lying in bed at the time of death, although surrounded by those of great affection, my friends and relatives, the suffering feeling of life being severed will be experienced by me alone. It sounds a little similar, but it says, the whole idea is that no matter what, our friends and relatives aren't going to be able to experience our karma ripening on them. Our suffering feeling that we have will be up to us. But I think he's getting at the point that they're not going to be of any help in dealing with that feeling or alleviating that feeling. Instead, we're going to have to endure it. And if we haven't created any merit, then we're going to go through that suffering of being severed from this life. We have to do it alone, but we have to nonetheless do it because we haven't created the merit. That's how I read it, but I know that the reading in here, it makes it sound like somehow if we create the merit, then they're going to be able to remove all of our suffering when we're being severed from this life, and I don't think that makes any sense. Yeah, I would be hard-pressed to say that that's the meaning that he's trying to get across here. So he says, not only is there nothing to alleviate my fear, but what use are friends and relatives against the minions of the Lord of Death when he holds... Oh, I already read that. I'm sorry. I didn't think I'd read all of that. Yeah. All right, let's go ahead and do the last two lines of 41 and then 42. My merit alone shall protect me then, but upon that I have never relied. O protectors, I, so unconscientious, unaware of such terror as this, perform many negativities for the sake of this impermanent life. So the commentary on those first two lines that kind of continue that thought that, again, at that time, only merit can rescue me, can rescue me from the severing of, the pain of being severed from this life. And I didn't rely on that merit. So at that time, only merits such as refuge, keeping morality, and so forth are the supreme refuge. But I also did not rely on them, Gyaltsab says. This shows regret because of not having practiced virtue. And again, they're mostly talking about the virtue of having confidence when one gets to one's death that one has used this life well, that one has engaged in what's necessary so that the mental suffering won't be happening. We can't be guaranteed that there isn't going to be physical suffering at the time of death, but the mental suffering is up to us. To what extent we can have a calm mind, a peaceful mind, it's up to our own practice of the virtue, our ability to rest in bodhicitta at that time, or whatever practices we have relied upon. So then the last point of this is one will be overcome by regret. And Gyaltsab says, after referring to the object of refuge as protector, it says, I, this reckless person, did not search out these dangers of the lower realms, and I did not know about them, but I generated much negativity in this impermanent life for the purpose of this life, such as friends and so forth. This I regret. So again, this is the reality of the situation for many beings, and we don't want it to be the reality for us to get to this life and realize how much negativity we've created on the basis of this life that was impermanent, like a water bubble. So another verse from Tokmi Sangpo's 37 Practice, this is stanza 4, he says, old friends with long association get separated. Material wealth amassed with much hardship remains behind. This is the verse I was talking about. The guest house-like body is left behind by the guest-like consciousness. Relinquishing this life is a practice of a bodhisattva. Letting go of our attachment to this life, our desire to, paint the walls of the hotel room that we're only in for this short time. Why put all of that energy and attention into making this life delicious and wonderful and delightful when it's over like that? And we'll regret that we haven't done something more important with this life. Okay, let's go on then to 43 and 44. One who is being led today to the spot where his limbs will be mutilated will be petrified. With dry mouth, sunken eyes, and so forth, his appearance is transfigured. What need to mention the tremendous despair when stricken with the disease of terror, being clasped by the frightful physical forms of the messengers of Yama. So if we look at, again, the situation that's being described here of somebody being led to their death right now, where these various things will happen, limbs will be mutilated and so on. Maybe it's not quite their death, but they're being tortured or what have you. What need to mention when we're marching to our executioner, to, being actually severed from this life. So on the top of page 18, it says, a person that is being led today by other humans to the ground where his limbs will be chopped off will be frightened. His mouth will be dry, his complexion will be pale, his eyes will burn, and so forth. As such, his appearance will be quite different to before. If that's so, just when someone's going to have their limbs hacked off, which is a pretty gruesome thought, but then what need is there to mention the fear of the extremely pitiful person whose flesh is being held by the fearful minions of the Lord of Death? I don't know who these minions are. Are they the little guys in the movie? It'd be kind of cute if they showed up, I guess, but I don't know. The Lord of Death isn't a person, by the way. This is a figurative thing of talking about. They often talk about Yama as being the Lord of Death. And it's just a personification of death. It's not that there is this actual being that shows up there. But can be horrific visions at the time of death, nonetheless, they say, that are all arisen from our own minds. So it says, being held by these minions and who's stricken with the fear of death, such a person will have great fear. Hence, Gyaltsab says, generate regret for negativity. Do what the whole point of this is. We got one more section for this, section 4. This is all under this idea of the way negativity is frightful. This is the way one will be overwhelmed by suffering later from having done all these things in this life. So let's read 45 and 46. Who can afford me good protection from this terror? With terrified, bulging eyes agape, I shall search the 4 directions for refuge. Then, seeing no refuge in the 4 directions, I shall become enveloped in gloom. If there should be no refuge there, at that time, what shall I do? So if we're kind of waiting until that time to do what needs to be done to avert all the suffering, well, good luck. I mean, it's not to say that the 3 jewels fail you at that time. You failed the 3 jewels, so you don't have anything to rely upon. You haven't done anything to create that support at the time of death. So Gyaltsab says on 18, having been reborn in the hells and seeing the hell guardians, one becomes very afraid and exclaims, oh, which person can rescue me from this great fear? With fear showing in one's wide open eyes, one searches in the 4 directions for a refuge. When one does not find one despite one's search, one's mind becomes completely dark. Hence, one should go for refuge to the 3 jewels starting right now. I mean, why wait until your next rebirth, till you're exiting this life and you have these visions of where you're headed and you end up going to these horrific places of suffering? At that time, the sources of refuge, again, can't help you because you never relied on them in this life. If there is no refuge, he says, in the hells that rescues one from dangers, then there is nothing to do then, and one must put right now effort into becoming free from the causes of those dangers. I mean, it's not to say that some beings can't have some ability to practice virtue in these horrible realms. There's a story of the Buddha prior to becoming a bodhisattva. He was born in a hell realm and generated some compassion for other beings who were suffering. But it's the rare individual who can have any dharma to rely upon in their minds in the midst of the suffering that are in these horrific realms. So, anyway. So everyone got regret now? We had how many verses dealing with regret? Any questions on regret or comments? What time is our afternoon break, by the way? Let me look at my 3:30. Okay, thank you, Sneh. Let's go to verses 47 and 48. We're moving on to the power of the base. So this is being presented closer to the way that, again, I had it with the power of the base being the support. We need to have a support for practicing the 4 opponent powers, purifying. So the very first of these headings under this is relying on the refuge of the 3 jewels starting right now. That's the message we got from regret. So now we're going to look at that in verses 47 and 48. Therefore, from today onwards, I go for refuge to the victors, the protectors of migrating beings, who strove for the purpose of protecting migrating beings, and with great power eradicate all fear. Likewise, I perfectly go for refuge to the Dharma they have realized, that clears away the fears of cyclic existence, and also to the assembly of Bodhisattvas. So we once more get the Mahayana refuge here. We get the victors, the Buddhas, who are the protectors, that we go to refuge to. Then we go to refuge to the Dharma that's in their mind, that they've realized, the true paths that are the realizations, as well as the true cessations that have come from that. And then the assembly of Bodhisattvas, which are the Mahayana Arya Sangha, Arya Bodhisattvas. So Gyaltsab says, one does not find a refuge when one is reborn in the lower realms, even if one searches. Again, it's not to say that the beings, that the Buddhas don't pervade those realms. The Buddha's enlightened activity and mind pervades all these realms, but the karma of the beings in those realms is such that they don't find a reliable refuge, because the karma is so strong in the lower rebirths to be separated from that. So we have to have created the causes to have refuge in our lives, and in the lower realms it's very difficult to take refuge even in a bit of Dharma in our minds. So it says, therefore, I quickly take refuge in the Conqueror, the protector of migrators, who strives to rescue all migrators, and who has the perfect ability to eliminate all the very powerful dangers. Again, perfect ability within the constraints of the karma of beings. It's not that Buddhas can wash away all our negativities and so on, the way that it's set out in Sutra, but they can appear and help and, be a force of helping sentient beings to be free from suffering and find happiness when sentient beings have created the corresponding causes for that. Further, I accept the Dharma that he understood and taught, the Dharma jewel that eliminates all the fears of psychic existence. And again, as I mentioned previously, this is our main refuge. We can take refuge in the Buddha, but if we don't follow the Dharma, if we don't take the medicine of the Dharma, there's no way the Buddhas can save us. We have to take the Dharma as our main refuge. I also accept the assembly of Bodhisattvas that have attained the state of a superior as friends in Dharma practice and perfectly go for refuge to them. Okay. Let's go on then to the next line, which says, relying on the children of the Conquerors that do powerful prayers. This is where we're going to talk about these bodhisattvas that have come up here and there, and I have my little cheat sheet here now with my post-it with the names of all of these 8 bodhisattvas who were actually Buddhas appearing in the retinue of Shakyamuni. Let's read verses 49 and 50 for this section. I, terrified, offer myself to Samantabhadra. To Manjughosha also I offer my body. To the protector of Avalokiteshvara, who unmistakably acts with compassion, I utter a mournful cry. Please protect this wrongdoer. So these bodhisattvas have made very powerful prayers, and so because they have the power of prayer, they can perhaps be of some assistance, but nonetheless, we have to create the causes again. Nothing happens without causes and conditions, without karma. And you can think, there's all these amazing beings who have compassion for me, in my state of suffering and delusion. But if I haven't created the causes to be benefited by these beings, I think, it's pretty hopeless in that regard. So these 8 bodhisattvas are being referred to here in a sense by virtue of 3 of them, Samantabhadra, Manjushri, or Manjughosha, and then Avalokiteshvara. Vajrapani is another one, Maitreya, Samantabhadra, Siddhigarbha, Akashagarbha, and Sarvanivarana Viskambini. That's the one I can never remember. Sarvanivarana Viskambini. Okay. You had them up too? No? All right, so let's look at what Gyaltsab says. Having become afraid of the fears of the lower realms, I offer myself to the child of the Conquerors, Samantabhadra, who does many powerful prayers. Through this, please rescue me from the dangers. Likewise, to Manjushri, without others having to urge me, I offer my body with a clear mind in the same request. Also, Avalokiteshvara, whose non-deceptive actions for others are motivated by compassion spontaneously and uninterruptedly, I implore you in anguish to please rescue me who is pitiful due to these dangers. Please rescue me, the sinner. This is how I plead. So this is, again, not to say that these beings just can swoop down and take you out of this state of misery and take you to the higher realms. If you've created some karma to be benefited by certain beings, this is why they do talk about in the Tibetan tradition the power of the guru at the time of death to help create some kind of transference of consciousness. But you have to create the causes for that. It's not because if the guru has all this amazing compassion for you, that's one side part of the equation. But you have to have aligned yourself with that energy. So we can see these verses, I think, to some extent as our sincere wish to rely upon these beings throughout this life, to not just wait until death and then seek their support, but to, as much as possible, do what we can to create that type of energy with them as well as our own gurus so that we can potentially rely on them. In that vein of relying on the guru, I did hear, I'm trying to remember who said this, Venerable Rabin is always like, who told you that? She wants to know the sources of everything that I teach, and I'm hard-pressed to find the sources of all of this. But there was somebody who told me that Lama Zopa was talking to somebody, and they were talking about a student who had passed away recently, and they said, I certainly hope that this person doesn't end up in the lower realms. And Rinpoche said a comment like, none of my students end up in the lower realms. But I think we have to look at what does it mean to be one of Rinpoche's students. There might be more that we need to fill in the blank. Just like going to Rinpoche's center doesn't make you necessarily one of Rinpoche's students, I think. You have to probably have a pretty strong connection with him, have gotten that kind of personal advice from him and really tried to follow it purely and really created an alignment. And then maybe there's some protection by virtue of your connection with Rinpoche, but I don't know, I'm just guessing. So then we have another verse, let's read 51 and 52 that are at the commentary as a continuation in this section for these great bodhisattvas. In my search for refuge, I cry from my heart to Akashagarbha, Sitigarbha, and all the compassionate protectors. And I go for refuge to Vajrapani, upon the sight of whom all hateful beings, such as the messengers of Yama, flee in terror to the four directions. So many of you know Vajrapani in the kind of tantric form of that. I assume that he was appearing as a human being, or this energy was appearing as a human being in this, as a bodhisattva in the retinue of the Buddha. But it's a very wrathful being, and it represents the power of the Buddhas. And so we're just kind of once more continuing these prayers to Akashagarbha, who was mentioned, Siddhigarbha, and then Vajrapani, who can have some sort of power. Gyaltsab J says, likewise I go for refuge to the Bodhisattva superior essence of space, is what he calls Akashagarbha, and essence of earth, which is what he calls Siddhigarbha, to all greatly compassionate protectors that have love and have eliminated obscurations. I implore them from my heart, please rescue me. I also take refuge into the Vajra holder, Vajrapani, whose mere sight causes the angry minions, and other angry, of the Lord of Death to scatter into the four directions. Okay. So again, I don't know what more to say on this. I think, we'd still have to take that caution that even though these beings have incredible compassion, have nothing but concern for suffering sentient beings, if they could avert, beings at the moment of death from a lower rebirth or from the hells when they're reborn there, well then I think we'd all be, in much fortunate states all the time, much more fortunate states. But nonetheless, we should take refuge. That was even said as part of this, right? These last two, it says, I go for refuge. I take refuge in these bodhisattvas. They're powerful objects for us, obviously, because they're highly realized beings that were simply appearing in the retinue of the Buddha as bodhisattvas. They didn't really have that status. They were beyond bodhisattva. Yes, Jennifer.
I also just realized that in the verses for the 8 auspicious noble ones that we read, the 8 bodhisattvas are listed there. So,
Yeah.
I guess the question is, so with the power of the object, like how they say the people who attack the great lamas, the Conquerors, etc., because of the power of the object, they're
Right.
benefited even though they create a lot of negativity. How is it that they're benefited, and how will their karma change? Like, will they be put in a position where they can create virtue in the future in relation to them?
I mean, I'm just guessing. I shouldn't probably even answer if I'm just guessing, but because I've never really heard a specific answer. But what they often say is that it's better to have a negative relationship with a guru than no relationship at all. So if they create harm towards the guru, it's not to say that they won't experience the suffering of that. That Buddha, if it's a Buddha and appearing in that form, they have nothing but compassion for that being, but they can't stop them from creating negative karma. If they create negative karma through the force of their own delusions, the karmic rule will determine they have to be the recipients of those actions. But they will reconnect with that guru, because even with a negative action towards those gurus, they have created a karma. It's weird, but creating karmic connections does cause the potential for there to be linkages then, especially in the rebirths that would become quite subsequent to that. So there can be, these shifts in the karma that happen by virtue of making a negative connection with a guru that wouldn't be there if they didn't make any connection at all.
And then would it be assumed that they'd eventually create a positive connection?
You would think so, because the guru would eventually be able to have a more positive influence on their life because of that karma they've created with them. They would be able to wheedle their way into that being's life and mind, and I don't know if wheedle's a word. Maybe it's needle, wheedle, I don't know. Whittle.
I understand that in the sense, so in theory, that creates the potential for them to connect future lifetimes in different ways. But we also say this, right? When we're doing non-regular drugs, the person saying my name.
Oh, right.
Anger, negativity, or whatever.
It's coming up in chapter 3. Yeah, exactly. No, that's the same type of thing. We want to make that idea that we can become wish fulfilling for others, that no matter what their relationship is with us, that they might harm us, cut us, beat us, whatever, we're going to have the opposite wish for them. So that means we become quite wish fulfilling in terms of that, but it doesn't mean still that I don't think, that changes the karma of that person in terms of what they did. What it does, though, is it creates a new karma by virtue of the connection with them, even through a negative action, because of the power of the compassion and the wisdom and so on of that being, to be able to come back around and help them in ways that they wouldn't have been helped if they hadn't made that connection at all. That's my understanding. Okay, one more verse and we're done with the second opponent power, the base or reliance. Let's read verse 53 together. Previously I transgressed your words, but now upon seeing this great fear, I go to you for refuge. By doing so, please swiftly clear away this fear. So the commentary, this is the headline for this, or outline, is having gone for refuge, practicing according to the advice. Again, it's not just, refuge isn't this, I just keep generating this thought of refuge and I'll be fine. You have to, what does it really mean to take refuge? It means to follow the Dharma, to actually engage in action on the basis of that. So he says here, Gyaltsab, previously I transgressed your words. I committed negativities and did not practice virtue. Now, having seen the infinity of cyclic existence and the great dangers of the lower realms, I take refuge in you. By my implementing what has to be practiced and what has to be abandoned according to your advice, please quickly eliminate all fears, I pray. So this is the only way that Buddhas alleviate fears. That verse I was mentioning earlier, Buddhas don't take your suffering away like they remove a thorn from the hand. They don't wash away all your negativities as you would wash dirt out of a cloth. They don't take their realizations and put them in the minds of others. How do Buddhas help sentient beings? By teaching the Dharma. So the conclusion we come to is what we mean by refuge isn't just reciting the words. It isn't just, I've got the little verse, I can say that, and then I've done that limb or that opponent power in terms of the 4. What does it mean to really take refuge as part of reliance? It means that you are determined to practice the Dharma, to follow the Dharma, to let this be a reminder of how much we have to rely upon the 3 jewels in our lives in terms of our behavior, our actions. Bodhicitta wasn't mentioned here. Remember, reliance has 2 aspects to it. We even saw that earlier when Gyaltsab was introducing the 4 opponent powers. He said the 4th power was meditating on bodhicitta and so forth. But I guess it's because this whole thing is on bodhicitta, right? So we're assuming that that's going to be a part of it. But that is once more how you repair the relationship, in a sense, with other sentient beings who you harmed, is by relying upon the mind of bodhicitta that now only wants to help them. Just like refuge is relying upon the 3 jewels that you've gone against, that now you only want to be in line with. You only want to follow purely by following their advice. Now we have the 3rd, the power of the thorough application of the antidote or the remedy. So the reason why it is appropriate to purify negativity is the first subject we're going to look at. Then within that there are 2 topics. The first one is showing by example of sickness why it is necessary to purify soon. So we have stating the meaning of the example in verse 54. Let's read that. If I need to comply with the doctor's advice when frightened by an ordinary illness, then what need to mention that it is so when perpetually diseased by the hundreds of faults of attachment and so forth. So this is the example that, in just worldly terms, if you want to alleviate some small suffering that you're having, you have to take the medicine or follow the prescription, the advice of a doctor. Here, because we're dealing with unbelievable suffering that can ensue from our actions, we have to rely upon the practice of particularly the remedy, because it's the remedy that once more is a very effective part, especially of getting rid of the fruitional results, the results of a rebirth in these unfortunate realms. So Gyaltsab says, when one is concerned that one may die, as one is afraid of the sickness, one has to implement the method to destroy the sickness. in accordance with the advice of the physician, even to cure a common disease like a disturbance in the winds or bile. If that is so, then what need is there to mention that it is appropriate to rely on the antidote according to the instructions of the Conqueror, the supreme physician, in order to be cured from the great chronic diseases of the three poisons of attachment, anger, and ignorance, as one has been continuously beaten down since beginningless time by the sources of hundreds of thousands of shortcomings. It is appropriate to rely on the antidote to negativity, to relieve those, the power of those, through the direct antidote, the remedy that we are creating, through all those various forces we looked at before, again, by reciting sutras or mantra, by reciting the names of the Buddhas, all the various practices, satsas and so on. Any virtuous practice essentially can be done as a remedy. Let's go on to the second part of this, which is the sickness of the three poisons has many shortcomings, and the medicine to destroy it is actually rare. Verse 55. If all the people dwelling in Jambudvipa can be crushed by just one of these, and if no other medicine to cure them is to be found in all the directions, let's continue, then the intention not to act in accordance with the words that can uproot every misery of the all-knowing physician is extremely bewildered and an object of scorn. So the first verse, and again you saw it kind of continues from one to the next, but verse 55, the commentary is, even one moment of anger towards a bodhisattva, we saw this earlier, right, can destroy all humans in Zambuling, give great negativity. Zambuling or Jambudvipa, this is our realm. Many of you know this from doing the mandala offerings and so on. It's a realm, that continent that's said to have two subcontinents and what have you. Don't get too hung up in the cosmology of all of that. It's just good to think about it in our realm, in this realm of human beings that we are living in. So the medicine against this great sickness, meditating on the path and so forth, one will not find anywhere else apart from the texts that reveal it. If one cannot find it in any other place, such as the world of Brahma and so forth, then it is unfindable elsewhere and therefore extremely rare. So maybe it's best to continue to finish this and then talk about it. If one stays obsessed with the causes of infinite cyclic existence in the lower realms, instead of putting the advice given by the all-knowing physician, the Buddha, who knows all the medicines to eliminate the sickness of the afflictions, and that liberates from all the pain of the afflictions, instead of putting all of that into practice, then that action is extremely ignorant and the object of criticism. Therefore, one should take refuge in the teacher from one's heart and practice the Dharma, shown by him accordingly. So, we're in a very special place in terms of being, having access to these teachings and the advice that he's giving us. And we have the afflictions that we've created, all the actions that we've created that can cause great suffering. And we're not going to find any other medicine that's going to cure this. We're not going to find anything else that will actually alleviate our suffering. So to not follow that advice, to not do what we can to, overcome the negativities, doesn't make any sense. They were an object of ridicule to, be in this world with access to all of this and to not actually apply the antidotes, to not actually do what we can to remove that. So then the second part of this outline says, showing the necessity to relate it to the example of the abyss or the precipice. This is verse 57. If I need to be conscientious near a small ordinary precipice, then how much more so near the precipices of long duration that drop for thousands of yojanas. So yojanas, by the way, are this distance. I can't remember what they were in our Abhidharma Kosha teachings over in Italy. Can't remember what, because they always gave the definition of it in terms of some other unit that was immeasurable too, or hard to know what the measure was.
12 to 15 kilometers.
Oh, okay. It's fair distance. I don't know how many miles that is, but what about 7 or something? I don't know. 7 to, I don't know. Because it's 2.5 kilometers per.
12 to 15 would be 10 to 12.
Oh, 10 to 12 miles? 1.6. I thought it was over 2. Okay, yeah, then, yeah, good. Thank you all for all your technical support. So Gyaltsep says, this again showing this example of the precipice or the abyss. So if you have this abyss that is falling, just in an ordinary way, something that would maybe break our legs or something. Here we're in an abyss that goes down. In the other translation by Venerable Frederick, it says 1,000 baktse. Baktse, I think, is the Tibetan for yojana. I don't know, I think because yojana is or yojana or something, I don't remember how it's pronounced. That's the Sanskrit word. Anyway, Gyaltsep says, one already needs to be very conscientious with small heights like hills where falling down would cause injuries. What need is there to mention the great abyss of 32,000 baktse, only indicated here by 1,000, where one needs to remain for a long time if one falls down. One needs to rely on the antidote to the affliction. So they do say in Buddhist cosmology, when you study the Abhidharmakosha, that these various realms are so many distances below the surface of the earth. I guess very similar to the way original teachings in Christianity talked about hell being down below the surface of the earth. But I don't know. There are beings everywhere. We can't tell where there are beings. Venerable Rabbeinu often talks about, I think it was Kirti Sencheb Rinpoche who was brought a cup of hot water or hot tea, and he goes, "Oh, there are hell beings in there." So I don't know, where do these beings abide? They're in their own realm with their own karma, they're having their own experience, even in the midst of this world that we think, again, that's our illusion, our karmic appearance of this world that is very pleasant in many, many ways, but they have a whole totally different experience of it. So this is just once more reminding us of why we need to purify, that we actually have to purify and do it soon because we've created the causes for all these various types of suffering. Why it is appropriate to purify soon. The previous one was the reason why it is appropriate to purify negativity, and then why it is appropriate to purify soon. Verse 58. It is inappropriate to stay happily thinking, today alone I shall not die, for inevitably the time will come when I shall go out of existence. So this is kind of close to what we were talking about before. This whole idea of death and impermanence kind of floats around this whole section. Gyaltsep says, one may think, although it is necessary to strive in the antidote, applying that against these negativities, it's good enough to start next month or year. The answer that someone gives is it's appropriate to start right from today. Why? Because it's unsuitable to remain comfortably lazy, not applying the antidotes, thinking that one will not die right today. As there is no certainty one will not die today, the time for me to become non-existent will most likely be tomorrow. I mean, again, we can think today. We can always have that thought, as I mentioned, that Rinpoche encourages us to think that today is the day. Today is the day I die. So therefore I have to be really careful, purify as soon as possible any negativities. So he says, hence I shall not be lazy and strive from today. So this section was about striving in the antidote to the afflictions, starting right now, starting today. And then there's a little quote from the letter of Kanika. This is for tomorrow. Today I do this. Actually, let me read the translation. I made a note in here that the translation from the other, from Ziggy translated this as well, this commentary by the abbot Drokpa Gyaltsen that I've been quoting from occasionally. And this is again verse 58 right here. It is not good for people to say, I'll put it off until tomorrow and do this today. A tomorrow when you go out of existence will inevitably come. I kind of like the wording of that better than what it says here. Okay, so now we got the final section or final verse for this third opponent power. This section is called, it's unsuitable to be lazy in meditating on the path because there is no reason to be unafraid of suffering. In other words, we should have great fear of suffering. Verse 59, who will grant me fearlessness? How can I be surely freed from this? If I shall inevitably go out of existence, how can I remain in mental happiness? So the argument is put forward, there's no use to be afraid of death as one will die anyway, so I won't be afraid. It's kind of some resignation around it that seems to be not that sound. The answer that Gyaltsep gives is, we see and hear that all others die, and the danger of dying and falling into the lower realm is there also for oneself. Which holy person could possibly free us from these dangers simply by saying, you do not have to fear death and negativities. There is no one who can guarantee that this lack of fear at the prospect of death is rational, is reasonable. That first part reminded me of something that Joan Halifax Roshi has in her book, Being with Dying, where she quotes the Mahabharata, where I can't remember who it is that says this quote. Somebody asked them, what is the most marvelous, wonderful thing, or not marvelous, but amazing thing in the world? And he says that people can be dying all around oneself, and one still does not think that oneself will die. That holding on to the sense that it's not going to happen to me. Well, obviously, we do. It does happen to us. But if we have that resignation where we open up to that and we just accept it, but we don't learn from that, we don't generate the fear that's supposed to instill in us, that prospect of death happening, is actually something to take very seriously, so that we do what we can to apply the antidotes and so on. So then he goes on to say, since there's nobody that can bestow freedom from negativities and death, how will one attain liberation if one does not strive in the antidote? No one else is going to do this for you. No one can guarantee that we don't have to face the consequences of these actions. He says then, one will not, and through death one will definitely become non-existent. So why do you, due to the force of laziness, remain with a happy mind and not strive in the antidotes to the negativities? This is unsuitable. Strive in meditating on the antidote. So it is kind of interesting. There is usually a discussion on these various antidotes, and I went into them. I don't know that I need to go into them in any more detail. The 6 traditional ones that were mentioned way back when he introduced this topic for that second power, relying on the profound sutras and so on. My teacher, Geshe Jampa Gyatso, went into a more detailed explanation of those, but I think he did. Yeah, I think there's a few things in here about that. But. So now we've got 3 opponent powers done. Everybody ready for the 4th, or any questions? All right, let's go on to the next page, which has the power of not reversing into the fault again. This is got a subsection first that's restraining oneself henceforth because of regretting the negativity. And we're going to look first at the topic of purifying meaningless activity, with the subtopic of it's unsuitable to be attached because possessions are unreliable. So let's read verse 60 that speaks to this. What remains with me now from the past experiences that have gone? Through my adherence to them, I have gone against my spiritual master's advice. So if we look at kind of all the ways we've gotten caught up in attachment to our possessions, to various things in our lives, all these enjoyments, our attachment to them has essentially gone against the advice we have from our gurus, which is to use as much of this life as possible in a meaningful way, to not get caught up in the pleasures of samsara and so on. What do we have to show for it? We haven't followed the advice that would actually bring us to something useful at the time of death, and instead we've done everything that has actually made it harder for us at the time of death, given us more negativity. So that verse, the commentary on it in Gyaltsabje on page 24 says, the experiences of enjoyment of past psychic existence were unreliable and have ceased. We saw that sentiment earlier. Now, what is left of these enjoyments that I took to have essence? There is nothing left. Therefore, regret having transgressed the advice of the teacher and then generated negativity due to having grasped at and being attached to these phenomena without essence. There's no lasting essence to any of these pleasures of samsara. They come and they go out of our experience, and instead of just having that passing experience, we grasped at them. We did negative actions in relation to them. Then it's also unsuitable to be attached to friends and so forth. Let's read verse 61. Leaving behind this life, and likewise my friends and relatives, if all alone I must go elsewhere, how appropriate are friends and enemies? It's again not to say that you don't have these beings in your life. We certainly want our friends and don't want our enemies, but nonetheless, it's more, how we relate to them, the attachment we have to the friends, the anger, the aversion towards the enemies. So Gyaltsabje says, this body I have while alive is without essence, and leaving behind friends and relatives in a similar fashion, I have to go without certainty of the direction and without freedom. Again, at the end of this life, we will be propelled by whatever karma is ripening. And we can have some influence on that, but that will be, for most beings, what dictates where they go to. It's going to be that final force that propels us into our next existence. So he says, that I have to go without certainty of the direction and without freedom. Regardless of whether they are friends and non-friends, they do not have the slightest benefit. And it is unsuitable to have attachment for them or aversion, towards the enemies. So, at the end of this life, I'm going to have to go alone. I'm going to have to leave all this behind. All of my attachment to the friends of this life, all of my aversion to the enemies of this life, they don't mean anything at that point. But the karma that we've created will be harmful to us. So this is feeding this desire that we have to see the necessity to refrain from these negativities in the future. So the second part of this, the first part we just finished with purifying meaningless negativity, is striving day and night to be liberated from negativity. So let's read verse 62. Whoops, I picked it up. How can I be surely freed from non-virtue, the source of suffering? Continually, night and day, should I only consider this. So this should be our primary thought, is like, how do I keep myself from continuing to do these things again and again? This is like I said, that horrible karmic result that we have of the result that's similar to the cause in terms of our behavior. We just keep doing the same thing again and again and again, out of our habit, out of our familiarity with the delusion. So we have to start breaking that through this fourth opponent power. Having seen that, there's no usefulness in any of these states of mind, we get to the end of this life, have to leave all these things behind. We now look at it and determine that, we have to actually do something to become free from all this non-virtue. This should be our primary motivation, right? There's that wonderful verse from the mind training text of, fighting the delusions. Vigilant the moment a delusion appears in my mind, I shall confront and avert it without delay. This is kind of our only job. This is what we're intended to do, is to really fight these tendencies that we have to continue to do the same thing again and again and suffer consequently. So Gyaltsab says, from non-virtue such as killing arise the sufferings of the hells and so forth. How can I become free from that, you ask? It is suitable for me to contemplate day and night only karmic cause and effect. If one does not gain certainty with regard to karmic cause and effect, then one will not have certainty for any dharma that makes the conqueror happy. Therefore, everybody should strive in this. Again, and being attentive then to the understanding the whole process. It's through the force of our delusions. Our ignorance is the root. We have delusions. We engage in negative karma. That negative karma causes us our suffering. It's just a continual process that we've been caught up in. So we should reflect on this process of karmic cause and effect, that this is how we are perpetuating our own suffering. Gyaltsab then says that some say they have gained certainty with regard to emptiness, but do not value karma, is clearly a distorted understanding. They have not ascertained that emptiness. They have not ascertained that emptiness is in actuality dependent arising. So emptiness and dependent arising, the fact that things do arise from their causes and conditions in terms of the physical world, but also in terms of karma and so on, that things have that reliance upon dependent arising, is the meaning of emptiness. Things lack any independent existence because they are only dependently arising. And the most basic way that we talk about dependent arising is dependency upon causes and conditions, because everything that is conditioned arises in that way. And so we have to uphold karma within the view of emptiness. I'm not sure why Gyaltsab felt a compulsion to put that in here at this point, but nonetheless, I guess there can be those people who distort the meaning of emptiness to mean that it's destroying cause and effect. It's destroying anything that we consider in our conventional understanding of reality. But conventional reality is upheld within ultimate reality. It's because things are empty, lacking any inherent existence, that they arise. There's no other sphere in which that can happen. Without emptiness, form and so on are not possible. But within emptiness, everything is possible. This is what Master Nagarjuna says. There's a few verses that here, I'll read this kind of nice collection. It's from the collection of indicative verses, and then we'll take a break. says, a person with negative conduct who has committed negativities and not created merit, who has deviated from the Dharma and heard non-Dharma, will fear death like a weak boat breaking apart in a great river. A person who has created merit and has not committed negativities and who has practiced the Dharma of the Holy One system will never fear death like a sturdy boat crossing to the other shore. So this is kind of some verses that were in the same section as this to kind of show the confidence that we can have at the end of this life if we practice in this way, if we actually determine to refrain from these actions in the future. And that ends the four opponent powers in terms of the confession that we want to be engaging in every day of our lives. Lama Zopa Rinpoche says, you're insane to not purify every day. So, now how effective our purification is up to us, our own individual practice. I know there are times when purification doesn't seem as juicy perhaps as what you might think it should be, but you have to try to cultivate that enthusiasm for engaging in this practice because it's obviously very, very important. So then we come to, this next section that we'll come and get to, and this finishes off the text, this first chapter 2. Let's do that after the break. So I have 3:30 here again, 3:45. And then we've got an hour and 15 minutes, and I'm still feeling confident. But we'll see. Okay, so before we get back into the text, let me share what I found during the break. This is in the section of the Lamrim Chenmo where they go into what actually is in karma, but it's at the end of karma they go into how you die and are reborn. I think it's under karma. Yeah. I'm pretty sure. Anyway, this is explained in 5 parts. The first part is causes of death, and this is where it's talked about. Causes of death. Death from the exhaustion of your lifespan means dying after you have used up all of the lifespan that was projected by your previous karma. So that's what we would call a natural death. That's when your karma that was projected by your life that was projected by your previous karma, when that lifespan runs out, that's death by the exhaustion of your lifespan. You've used it all up. All the grains of sand that were in the hourglass have fallen to the bottom chamber. There's nothing more you can draw from because that has been exhausted. Death from exhaustion of your merit means, for example, dying deprived of the necessities of life. So if in this life you aren't so wise in terms of how you manage the merit that you came in with, as well as accumulating more merit to be able to have the resources that you need, you could die from exhaustion of your merit. So you don't have any of these necessities that you would have required to live that full lifespan. There's also death from failure to avoid danger, in regard to which the sutras list 9 causes and conditions for premature death. And a lot of them have to do with eating, believe it or not. Overeating, eating something indigestible, eating without having digested the previous meal, failing to expel undigested food that has accumulated in the stomach, intestinal obstruction, not relying on specific medicines for specific illnesses, failing to understand the distinction between accustomed and unaccustomed activities. I'm not sure what that is. Untimely death, which is an accidental death. If you die in the car that has an accident where you pass away. And engaging in sexual intercourse. Not just, obviously not doing it once. We're talking about, I guess, excessive sexual intercourse. It's kind of interesting in the Chinese medicine perspective, which I was aware of some because of my study at Tai Chi before finding Buddhism. They say that one of the ways you exhaust your chi, which is kind of your essential life force or whatever, is through excessive sexual activity. And so maybe that's what's being referred to here. There's no real commentary in this one. I didn't go to Geshe Sopa's commentary, but you might look that up. Let me see if I can find again what section this is in. Yeah, it's all within karma. How you...
Medical texts.
Yeah, all these various things that can go wrong. Because it talks about what happens then at the time of death, where the heat gathers, where you are reborn. I think it's all towards Oh, it is in the, no, it's in the middle scope. It's the end of chapter 20 in the Lamrim Chenmo, volume 1, just before the 12 factors of dependent arising. So it is in the middle scope. I didn't think it was the karma. All right, good enough? Okay, let's go back to the last bit of chapter 2. Let's read verses 63. Let's go ahead and read all of them, 63 through 65. Through unknowing and ignorance, whatever I have committed, be it a natural misdeed or a stipulated misdeed, I confess all of them directly in the presence of the protectors, with hands, folded hands, prostrating again and again, my mind terrified by suffering. I request the guides to please accept my negativities as being mistakes. Since they are not good, I shall not do them again. So now where did I put my commentary? There it is. Okay, so then we go to Gyaltsab. This is this last section, confessing what one did before and then making a promise to refrain from the negativity after having requested attention. First, what one has to confess. What one has to confess. We have this idea of both the natural misdeeds. This is a concept in Buddhism that we frequently talk about. There are some actions that, by virtue of their nature, are negative. And that's essentially the 10 non-virtues and things in that vein, which are like killing. Killing is a natural misdeed. You don't take any, you don't need anything that makes it negative. It's negative by its nature. Because it is something that brings forth the cause of suffering. And then you have what are called stipulated misdeeds. So this is the idea of a negativity that you commit because it was stipulated in the vows of the Buddha to refrain from that. So a lot of the things that they have in the monastic vows, I've never studied the monastic vows because I've never been a monk, but things like not cutting branches or digging in the ground. I mean, those are not natural misdeeds, right? People who don't have any vow against that can dig in the ground all they want. Of course, if they're being really careless and killing worms while they're doing it or something, or even intentionally killing worms while they're doing it, it's very different. But some of those are only stipulated because they are behavior that the Buddha felt were more conducive or were better to avoid for those people who have a monastic life and so on. So of the 5 lay vows that we often practice, that again are the recommended behavior that you follow while in the basic program, the first 4 are natural misdeeds. You know, the killing, stealing, lying, engaging in unwise sexual behavior, particularly adultery. But the 5th one, which is having alcohol and intoxicants, that's not a natural misdeed. You know, people going out to the bar and having a drink, they aren't engaged in negativity just by virtue of putting alcohol down their throat. It obviously is in the list because it's a doorway through which you engage in other negativities. Once you get a little looser in terms of your speech and your actions, then you inevitably, or not all the time, but certainly frequently, engage in negative actions on that basis. So Gyaltsab says, I have created each and every negativity due to unknowing and ignorance with regard to karmic cause and effect, regardless of whether it's the action of a person with vows who only creates accepted negativity, or the action of a person without vows who only creates natural non-virtues with regard to self and others. I mean, only is kind of a strong term there because obviously it's only in relation to those vows that you create stipulated negativity, and especially those that are not negative by nature. So we've kind of done that. We've admittedly done all of these things in terms of gone against our vows and stipulated behavior or engaged in natural negativities. Then the second part of it, the way of confessing, was verse 64. Gyaltsab says, one should confess all one's negativities by prostrating repeatedly in front of the Buddhas and their children with folded hands and a mind that sees the dangers of the negativities. So I think that's pretty self-explanatory. The final verse that we read is the final part of this, making a promise to refrain from the negativity after having requested attention. So it's a final assertion of that 4th opponent power, that we're going to do what we can to not engage in these again. It says, O guides, for these reasons, please accept my negativities as mistakes. Since these negativities are not wholesome, I promised not to do them again. even at the cost of my life. Make the promise in this way, not to do the negativity henceforth, even at the cost of one's life. So again, this is an important part of it. We don't, when we're looking at these negativities, we have to recognize that the whole desire to purify is because you are the recipient of the results of those. It's not like anyone else is really involved. And I think, when I was talking about the act of contrition that we engaged in Roman Catholicism, there was always this feeling like something being imposed on you, like this was God punishing you or something. But you create your own punishment. You create your own suffering. So if you really care about yourself, if you really have genuine self-compassion, then you're going to want to purify your negativities, because why do you want yourself to suffer in this life by virtue of some actions that will ripen in this life or even in the future? And that isn't you in the future in terms of I'm not going to be Don in my next life, but it's a continuation of my consciousness that will bear the burden of everything I've done with my consciousness in this life. If we have compassion for that being in the future, then we have to purify and refrain from the negativities. Top of page 26, the conclusion. I'll read this quickly. Although there are many doors for purification explained in the teachings and treatises, to purify by way of the complete four powers is the way to purify. That this purifies also the karma definitely to be experienced is explained in the Tokpa Barwa and the great commentary on the 8,000 verse sutra, which is the Prajnaparamita Sutra. We who do not know the instances of karmic cause and effect well, and who, although knowing a little, do not practice what has to be abandoned and what has to be practiced accordingly, should confess on a daily basis, uninterruptedly, by way of the four powers. Especially one should practice by focusing on purifying the obstacles to the generation of bodhicitta. Once more, remembering that this is the context of all of this, is that we want to make sure that we are able to cultivate this precious mind of bodhicitta that we were praising and recognizing the benefits of in the first chapter. So the summarizing verse is, those tormented by the faults of attachment, jealousy, and conceit due to exaggeration will not generate the supreme mind. Hence, whatever mistakes one made with body, speech, and mind, confess them from the depths of one's heart to the protectors. So this is the confession of negativities and so on. I don't need to read that part of it. Any final questions on Chapter 2? Okay, let's go on to Chapter 3. Chapter 3, we pick back up right where we were in terms of the four other limbs. And so we go into the limb of rejoicing. Most of you know about the great power of rejoicing. This is one of the, as we saw, let me pull that up real quickly, in the chart that we had for now I've got to, here it is. This was, again, from that For the Highest Good set of handouts. I think we're up to something like, I don't know what page now, 8, 9, something like that. Oh, we have to go back. That's right, we got to go back. Sorry. We're going back to the one, chart 1, that was on page 6. Chart 1, again, mentions rejoicing as verses 3.1, 3.1 to 3.4. Rejoicing is the fourth of these. It increases our merit. So you can increase the merit of the virtuous actions that you've done or that others have done by rejoicing in them, by bringing to mind them and generating great joy thinking about them. It is essentially that practice, taking joy in one's own and others' virtues. And then it acts as an antidote specifically to jealousy. If you think about why jealousy arises, particularly when we're talking about rejoicing in others, it's there because we aren't rejoicing in others' good fortune. In fact, we are envious that they have the good fortune that we don't possess. So the mind of jealousy is counteracted by rejoicing, and it helps you, according to Rinpoche, to achieve the holy body of a Buddha. So let's go to the verses. This is divided into 3 parts, rejoicing. Rejoicing in the virtues that are the causes of higher status and in their effects. So this is the first verse, number 1. Let's read that. With joy I rejoice in the virtue that relieves the suffering of unfortunate rebirths of all sentient beings and in the abiding unhappiness of those subject to suffering. So again, this is the causes that are related to the The lower scope, the small scope, where we are rejoicing in all the actions that help beings to avoid the unfortunate states and to be free of those types of suffering and being able to abide in happiness. Gyaltsab says, I rejoice in the causal virtues that give respite from the sufferings of the lower realms and of all sentient beings abiding in cyclic existence and which cause them to attain special higher status. I also rejoice in the result, them abiding the abiding of the suffering sentient beings in the happiness of higher status. Reflecting on these with pleasure, I rejoice in their existence. So here we start off by rejoicing in the good virtue, the good karma, virtuous karma that sentient beings engage in that help them to attain the higher rebirth and avoid the lower realms, and then to abide in that state. Now we go on to rejoice in the virtues that are causes of mere liberation, meaning the liberation of the Hinayana practitioners, and in their effects. This is verse 2. I rejoice in that accumulation of virtue that is the cause for enlightenment. I rejoice in the definite liberation of embodied beings from the suffering of cyclic existence. So it says enlightenment, but again, we're talking about the lower enlightenment. Sometimes they use that term enlightenment and say the lower enlightenment of the Hinayana versus the higher enlightenment of the Mahayana. At the top of page 2 of Gyaltsab commentary, he says, I also rejoice in the accumulation of the virtue, which becomes the cause for the enlightenment of the hearers and self-liberators, or solitary realizers are frequently called pratyeka Buddhas, such as the virtue that harmonizes with liberation, these 37 harmonies with enlightenment that are common with the Hinayana practitioners. Again, they go into detail about those, I think, in the footnote, maybe not. Not sure where the footnote even is for that. Oh, it's at the end of this one section. Oh, no, it says it's a euphemism for the path of accumulation. Sorry, I got that wrong. I was thinking of the 37 harmonies with enlightenment. But this is for the path of accumulation. I'm not sure why that says. Yeah, rejoice in the accumulation of virtue. I guess it's the virtue that they accumulate on the path of accumulation, their path of accumulation. The Hinayana has 5 similar paths, but they obviously aren't identical to the Bodhisattvas. They have a path of accumulation, a path of preparation, a path of seeing, meditation, and then their path of no more learning isn't quite no more learning, it's no more learning on their path, because obviously they still have to do the learning on the Bodhisattva path. But nonetheless, this must be using as an example the virtue that is accumulated on the path of accumulation for them, that is called here, that virtue that harmonizes with liberation. I know I've heard this term before, but I'm not sure the translation's probably different. I know it's called partial concordance with liberation, I think is a term that I normally see in the translations that I've used. I also rejoice in the attainment of definite liberation from the sufferings of psychic existence by embodied beings as a result of that virtue. So we rejoice in the merit that gets you there to liberation and the state of liberation that these beings attain. Yeah, bless you, George. Third rejoicing. So obviously we're going to rejoice in the great scope. We rejoiced in the small scope, we rejoiced in the middle scope. Now let's read that 2-line verse, that's verse 3, and then the verse 4. I rejoice in the enlightenment of the protectors and also in the grounds of their children. With joy I rejoice in the ocean of virtue, of generating the mind of enlightenment that causes all sentient beings happiness, as well as in the deeds that benefit sentient beings. So Gyaltsab says, I also rejoice in the complete enlightenment of the protectors of migrators and in the 10 grounds of the Conquerors' children, the Bodhisattvas. I also rejoice with joy in the cause of these, the ocean of virtue that is the mind generation for complete enlightenment, bodhicitta, which works for the happiness of all sentient beings, and also in the actions that benefit sentient beings. On all of these I meditate with clear faith that is combined with mental happiness and rejoice with pleasure. So all of these meditations on rejoicing, when you do rejoicing, it's not just thinking about these things. Rejoicing is cultivating joy in your heart. It's what we were talking about earlier in terms of how do we generate some joy in the midst of all these various practices. Well, this is a practice of generating joy. So it is important that you have that thought while you're doing it, that feeling of just, because the whole thing is all of these that we're rejoicing in are the causes of happiness of beings in various, definitions, but then also the causes that bring about those results. Let's go to the next one. This is requesting to turn the wheel of Dharma. Before we recite the verse, let's go ahead and go back real quickly to the handout. The handout talks about how this is a practice of accumulating merit, the fifth one. And the practice is done by visualizing, offering a golden, oh no, this is the opposite order. I'm sorry, I don't know why they're the opposite order on here than what we're going through. This is actually number 6 in ours. That's what it says in the chart earlier. Request to turn the Dharma wheel. That accumulates merit as well, and you do it by offering a beautiful Dharma chakra. Dharma chakra, they usually have them in like the physical form. I'm not sure if you have one here with 8 spokes representing the eightfold path. Excuse me. But sometimes they say to visualize 1,000 spokes. I don't know, it's kind of hard to visualize 1,000 spokes. But you want to visualize yourself in the form of Brahma gods, because the story is, of course, that the Buddha, 49 days after he attained enlightenment, he hadn't yet taught the Dharma. And the Brahma gods, the gods of that realm, came and appeared before him and said, you have to teach the wheel of Dharma. You know, the sentient beings need these teachings. And he was reminded of his compassion, they say. I mean, he always had it, but he was just waiting for the time to be right. And he decided to teach the Four Noble Truths Sutra. That was the first teaching he gave. So you're kind of reenacting that in your mind by visualizing yourself in the form of these countless Brahma gods who are offering a Dharma chakra. And that's the antidote to ignorance and abandoning the Dharma. And it helps you to achieve the Buddhist speech, because how do Buddhas turn the wheel of Dharma? Through their speech. I mean, they obviously exemplify it in other ways, but primarily through their speech. Let's read verse 5 together. With folded hands I beseech the Buddhas of all directions to shine the lamp of Dharma for all bewildered in the darkness of suffering. So Gyaltsab Je says, the respectful request with palms folded to the Buddhas of all directions that became enlightened recently and who have not started to teach the Dharma yet. I don't know if that's who we're specifically requesting. I found that comment kind of strange. You know, that we're requesting all Buddhas to teach the Dharma, not those that have just newly become enlightened. That was the story of the Buddha that I just, reviewed with you. But anyway, it says, please light the lamp of scriptural and realized Dharma that clarifies the path to liberation for the purpose of sentient beings who suffer and who are confused in the darkness of ignorance. So once more, recall that there are 2 types of Dharma chakra that are often presented. We mentioned this yesterday, Dharma chakra of scripture, which are the actual turnings of the wheel of Dharma in terms of the words that the Buddha spoke. And they often talk about the 3 turnings of the wheel of Dharma, which were the Four Noble Truths. Then the Prajnaparamita Sutras is the second wheel turning, often called the Dharma chakra without characteristics. I went through these in the Heart Sutra when we had the Heart Sutra class online with the Miami group. And then finally the third wheel turning, which is called the Dharma chakra of fine discrimination. I'm not going to go into those today, but know that you can find information in various places about those. His Holiness talks about them in particular in the book called The World of Tibetan Buddhism. Then there's the Dharma chakra of realization. So there's scripture, what was actually taught, that we have in writing and so on that we can follow. And then we have the realization, which are essentially achieved through practicing the 3 higher trainings, through engaging in morality, concentration, wisdom. So this is what we're trying to achieve ourselves, is to have these realizations, but we have to continue to offer this Dharma chakra to request the gurus to teach, the Buddhas to teach. Why? Because we want that to continue in this world. We want all beings to be able to become enlightened by virtue of the Dharma. Then we have the next request, the 6th limb, which is requesting not to pass beyond sorrow. Again, in our chart, it was the 5th one. I think I just put them in this order on the chart because that's how they're frequently in the prayer. But there's no certainty to that order of these 2, numbers 5 and 6. This supplication to remain is also about accumulating merit, and here it's offering the golden lion throne. So you think about, by lion throne, it doesn't mean that you're sitting on a lion. It means that there are 8 snow lions that are holding aloft this beautiful golden throne. And You can think about the throne being embedded with beautiful jewels, however you want to make it ornate and wonderful. And you offer that, again, thinking of replicas of yourself, all offering this throne. And the throne represents the throne that the Buddhas will abide on to continue to be here forever until samsara is emptied. And at the end of this, you can visualize all the thrones being absorbed into the Buddha's throne. No one's ever told me the exact visualization for after you offer the Dharma chakra, but sometimes I tell people maybe have it all absorbed into the throat of the Buddha so that it becomes the cause for them to continue to teach the Dharma. I don't know, just one idea. This is said to purify negativities in relation to the Guru, such as disrespect, and it helps you to meet the holy Dharma again. That's what Rinpoche says is the benefit of engaging in this limb of the 7 limbs. So let's read verse 6 together. With folded hands I beseech the victors who wish to enter nirvana, not to leave migrating beings in blindness and to remain for countless eons. So, if these are Buddhas who we're talking to, they have no intention of, entering into nirvana. Even when Shakyamuni Buddha passed away from this life after 80 years or so, he didn't do it because he was like, I need to get out of here, I need to go on into nirvana. The karma was exhausted, for that to be happening, and it was a profound teaching that the Buddha gave of impermanence. But nonetheless, all those beings who at any point we could lose their influence in this world if we don't create the causes for that. They are Buddhas appearing in this world to help us, especially our gurus, as we talked about earlier. So we want to have that karma that we create that continues to have them in this world, continues to have them abiding in a form that we can benefit from. So it says there on page 3 of Gyaltsep Je's commentary, the request with folded palms to the conquerors who wish to go beyond sorrow. Again, they don't wish to. That's not a part of it, but we can see that as our karma. If they were to go to that state beyond sorrow, we would miss them. We would want them to be back. So please do not cause the wisdom eye of these migrators to be blinded by ignorance. Rather, please remain for uncountable eons to illuminate the darkness of ignorance. It almost sounds like a request to teach, but it's embedded within this idea of remaining here for uncountable eons until samsara is emptied. Then we have the limb of dedication, and there's going to be a general dedication for the sick to alleviate hunger and thirst, and then the fulfillment of all wishes. So let's actually recite all those verses together, 7 through 10, and then we'll talk a bit about dedication. Thus, by the virtue accumulated through all that I have done, may all the suffering of all sentient beings be dispelled. May I be the doctor and the medicine, and may I be the nurse for all sick migrating beings in the world, until their sicknesses are healed. May a rain of food and drink descend to clear away the suffering of thirst and hunger, and during the Aeon of Famine, may I myself turn into food and drink. May I become an inexhaustible treasure for those who are poor and destitute. May I turn into various articles of all necessities and abide close before them. So this is this dedication that completes the 7 limbs. And then we have some additional dedication verses that come after this. Dedication itself, the 7th limb, is essentially what it does is it multiplies the merit to some degree, but it makes it inexhaustible by virtue of dedicating it for enlightenment, because your enlightenment is essentially inexhaustible. When you achieve that, it continues on without any need to generate new merit and becomes the cause for helping sentient beings until samsara is emptied. So you dedicate your past and present merits. Oftentimes Rinpoche even dedicates not just your own merits, but due to the merits of all the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas, he goes into his whole long dedication. We can think that, that may, through all the positive actions that have been done, but I assume it's mostly our own merits that we are wanting to make sure that are safe, protected, so that we can continue to have that result when that arises in the form of our own enlightenment. It counteracts, is the antidote to heresy and wrong views, according to Rinpoche, and it plants the seed to achieve all knowledge and qualities of the Buddha. Again, I just put these in there because I thought they were interesting. you don't need to necessarily, know a whole lot more about those. But the individual verses, as we saw, there were 4 parts to this. The general dedication, Gyaltsab says, through whatever virtue I've accumulated by having acted in this way, from making offerings up to making requests, may all sufferings of all sentient beings be cleared away. So now the other 3 are more specific, and this one kind of works with this analogy of the 3 jewels I mentioned earlier when we talked about refuge, right? The perfect doctor with the perfect medicine, and the nurse or the assistants that help us in applying the medicine in our lives. Through the power of these merits, may I be the medicine, the physician, and the nurse for the sick migrators until they are cured from their disease. And then this whole one about this intermediate eon or whatever that was mentioned, this is during the Aeon of Famine. Apparently, the various eons end in various ways, some due to weapons, some due to disease, some to famine. This is talked about in Vasubandhu's text, that these intermediate eons come to an end in various ways. So he's kind of saying at this time when there's great hunger, when the eon is ending with this Aeon of Famine, may I be the food and drink for others. So Gyaltsab says, may I be able to clear away all harm of hunger and thirst with the rain of various foods and drinks for all those who are hungry and thirsty. At the time of the intermediate Aeon of Famine, out of the 3 intermediate eons, may I be able to pacify the hunger and thirst of sentient beings by myself becoming food and drink for them. So I think they had weapons, disease, and famine, but I think there's another one by fire or something. We saw that earlier, right? I think it was used earlier in one of the verses. Now, then we have the dedication for the fulfillment of all wishes, a bit more specific here too, about becoming this inexhaustible treasure. And we're going to see this idea carry over into some of the verses to come, this wish-fulfilling jewel for others. Gyaltsab says, for the sentient beings that are destitute and lack the requisites and necessities of life, may I become a treasure that is inexhaustible, despite being used, kind of like a never-ending cup, that you always get something out of it. Something is perpetually being generated for the welfare of others. May I abide effortlessly in front of them as the various necessities they need. Okay, so that kind of brings to conclusion the 7 limbs. But as I said, this moves into a section that Gyaltsab's outline says an auxiliary of the perfection of generosity, training in the thought of giving away body, possessions, and roots of virtue. I mentioned this earlier. Some of the verses we're going to get to soon, starting on the next page of Gyaltsab, are what Rinpoche uses in terms of his daily meditation that he, encourages his students to start with, this method to transform a suffering life into happiness. So let's start with this idea. Any questions on the 7 limbs? Last call. Okay. Training in the thought of giving away body, possessions, and roots of virtue. First, the way of giving, verse 11. Without any sense of loss, I shall give my body and resources, as well as all my virtues of the 3 times, for the sake of accomplishing the welfare of all sentient beings. Actually, this is where it starts. I'm sorry. I don't know why I was looking at that next. I didn't recognize that translation of it. So this is where Rinpoche's method to transform suffering life into happiness. He starts off with a nice little Lam Rim prayer. I really recommend you do this. You can download it for free from FPMT. Just put in a search at fpmt.org for the method to transform a suffering life, and you'll get a link to the file. He starts off with a beautiful Lam Rim verse, and then he goes into the few verses, one from the 8 verses to transform the mind, and then one from Nagarjuna. And then he goes into these verses from Master Shantideva. Master Shantideva. And then he has, after Master Shantideva's verses, then he goes to a practice of purifying your speech, which is very powerful to do, and additionally some mantras. But it's a really wonderful thing if you can do that. So this is the way of giving that we just read. Also, my body and possessions, Gyaltsab says, such as food and drink, and all my virtues that are contained in my 3 doors within the 3 times, I offer with a mind free from regret and dependence to achieve the temporary and ultimate purpose of sentient beings. So this idea that we're just going to offer everything, we're going to be as generous with what we possess to all sentient beings. Let's look at the next section. The reason why one should definitely give. This is divided into 2 parts. Let's go ahead and read all of verse 12. By giving all, I shall transcend sorrow, and my mind will accomplish nirvana. All will be given similarly. It is best that I give to all sentient beings. So sometimes there's a translation of this verse that says by giving away all. Anyway, let's go ahead and use what's here. I was trying to recall. There was another translation I saw Venerable Sarah did, where the idea is that since we are going to have to part with from everything at death, it's better to use it now in a more productive way, because at death, we're going to lose all of that, so why not give it away now? That's one sentiment that could be implied here, but it's not how it's translated in this. So it says there for the first two lines, this is by giving up attachment for everything and offering, one goes beyond misery. So Gyaltsab Je says, my mind wants to achieve the non-abiding state. This is what we call non-abiding nirvana. Here in our verse it just simply said nirvana. The difference between just nirvana and non-abiding nirvana is that Buddhas attain non-abiding nirvana because they don't hang out in that solitary peace that I mentioned yesterday, right? The solitary realizers and the hearers, when they finish their path and become arhats, foe destroyers, they check out of that life and they abide in the solitary peace. That's what we're referring to here as just nirvana. The Buddhas attain that state of peace, but they don't abide in it. They don't hang out in it. They stay active in the world. So non-abiding nirvana, or in the non-abiding state beyond misery, as it's described here, is Buddhahood. So it says, in giving up one's body, possessions, and all roots of virtue enables one to achieve that aim. Hence it is suitable to give up everything. It's best just to give it all up, to give it all away. Now again, it doesn't mean that you have to go home physically now and empty out your entire apartment and give everything away. But you have to have that mind of constantly wanting to give. And if you do use the resources that you have, to think of using them for the benefit of others. Think that they are dedicated for the welfare of others. So then the next part of that verse is making offering to sentient beings is appropriate, as they are the supreme field for generosity. So to surrender everything at once, Gyaltsab Je says, is equal to offering it. And to offer it to sentient beings is the supreme offering, because through this offering, one attains enlightenment. So I mentioned earlier how you can talk about two fields. The Buddhas are a very powerful field because of their excellent qualities, and then you have the field of sentient beings that are excellent because of the benefits we gain from them. When we give to beings who actually need and require our resources, there's an extra benefit there that is not the same as when we give to the Buddhas. It's very powerful to give to the Buddhas, but the Buddhas don't need your objects of offering. They don't have any use for them at all. I mean, it's not to say that we shouldn't give. If we have Buddhas manifesting in our life like our gurus, we shouldn't give them any of our material possessions. They're the best ones to give our material possessions to in terms of making sure they go to good causes in that and what have you. But we shouldn't neglect the sentient beings that actually need our resources for their sustenance, for their necessities, and so on. So better to give it, all at once, as much as we can, everything that we possess. And as I said, at least have the mind that holds that view that what we have is being used for the benefit of others. So now, how to practice after the offering. There are 3 sections to this. From today on, I give up the idea of having freedom over my body. Let's read verse 13. Having already given this body as what makes them happy, for the pleasure of all embodied beings, depending on what pleases them, constantly killing, abusing, or beating it, let's continue, although they may play with my body and make it a jest and blame, because I have already given this body of mine to them, why do I act with concern? So we're saying here that, we're giving our bodies over to others. It's like we're offering it to them. We said earlier we were offering our bodies to the Buddhas and so on as a servant to them. But here the idea is I'm going to offer my body so that other beings can do what they need to with it, however they want to use it to satisfy their own needs. And so the question is raised, how shall one act upon having offered one's body? The answer is, now that I have offered this body to all sentient beings to do with it as they please, it depends on what pleases them. They can always kill it, insult it with words, or physically beat it, and so on. I must give up attachment to my body and completely give up my anger towards others. Now we're going to see this thought kind of, reversed in terms of the final part of this section, because we don't want sentient beings to do things that harm themselves. Obviously, I mean, who wants to have other sentient beings on the basis of our giving them something, do something harmful? We run into that question all the time when people ask about giving to homeless people. Well, they ask, well, if I give them money and they end up using that money to buy a drug that they inject in their veins and they die from it, well, then what good is my money, because it only contributed to their suffering? This is true. We don't want sentient beings to do negative things with the things we offer to them. But nonetheless, I still think we each have to find our own way to navigate that whole concern about giving resources to others. Here it's within this concept of if I'm giving my body to others, how they use it is up to them, but nonetheless I don't want them to engage in negativity. But that first verse that we just read says yes, I mean you want to give it away to them, and if they decide that they need to kick your body, kill you, criticize you, whatever, that's up to them. That's, if that's what pleases them. You might read in conjunction with this Lama Zopa's commentary on these verses, which I believe is in the Bodhisattva Attitude book I mentioned yesterday, that also has bodhicitta mindfulness in it. It's quite nice because Rinpoche has a very delicious way of talking about these verses. So the second verse that we read is explaining the meaning of this extensively. So it says, since I have already unconditionally given my body to others, they should be able to do with it as they like. From today onwards, why should I concern myself with protecting it, even though they use it for play, amusement, or ridicule it? I know this sounds like pretty outrageous stuff. You kind of think, well, is this really necessary? Do we really have to go to this extreme? We're not there yet. Don't think that you have to be there now, but as I said yesterday, you keep working to develop the skill to be able to do that. Even that little quote I read from His Holiness during the motivation this morning. Although we can't currently help beings to the extent we'd like, we have to train ourselves to do that. How do you train yourself to do that? By thinking these kinds of thoughts. So that then when you're walking down the street and say somebody for no reason in particular comes up to you and berates you, and starts criticizing you, you can go, oh, good, they're using me and whatever pleases them. I mean, don't feel good that they're creating this negativity, make strong prayers for them. But nonetheless, we're going to see verses coming up that are about becoming wish-fulfilling for others, that when they criticize and berate us, we can still become the cause for their enlightenment. So we were talking about that earlier, right? The last two lines, which are 15ab, let's read those two lines. I shall make it do whatever action that will not cause any harm. So there's two different translations of this, different ways to translate it. One is this idea that I will make my body do whatever action that won't cause any harm to others. So I will refrain from harming them through my body. But here is the idea, as it says in Venerable Fetter's translation, I shall allow them any action that does not harm them. In other words, you can do whatever action you want to this body, but don't harm yourself in the midst of doing that. Don't create negative karma if you can. But from my side, I'll happily take your criticism, your beating, your killing, whatever. But you really you want to have that wish that sentient beings use your body in more skillful ways, that they aren't using it to create negative karma. So just finish this and then we'll open it up to questions. I shall let them do any action that benefits self and others and does not harm self or others, now and in the future. So we want that wish for others, that they actually do something meaningful and wonderful with this body. But nonetheless, as I said, the translation we have in Ziggy's translation is kind of the opposite, that I'm not going to do anything with my body that will harm others. May my body only be a benefit to others. Kind of, and maybe you arrive at the same place to some degree, but were you going to say something, Jennifer?
Just that, the question that comes up about receiving harm but not being a punching bag or a doormat and not perpetuating, because I have seen it too, in the Dharma friends, just receiving the teachings and being like, okay, I'm just going to keep on getting abused and stuff. And
Again, for most of us, we're probably not at the level where we could practice as purely as what it says here, which I think, again, for those beings, and Rinpoche even talks about this in his commentary on this, bodhisattvas want to be used. We have this idea in our culture that we don't want to be used, we don't want to be taken advantage of, we don't want to have things that exceed what... Well, that's okay for where we're at, but obviously when we develop our minds further and further, there's less and less attachment to me and my needs and what have you. I still think once more, there's always going to be that balance between if I am the subject of other people's abuse, I may not want it ceased because I can't bear it and because it's not, but I want it to cease on the part of the other person. So I'm always recommending, certainly, if anyone's involved in any kind of an abusive relationship where the abuse is being perpetuated by inaction, well then try to extricate yourself from that or have that resolved, because you're only becoming the party to their creating that negative karma. You're the object of their negative karma, and they're creating unbelievable negative karma by abusing you. So I think the Bodhisattvas, they're always working with this balance of how do I make sure that others, because that's why the Buddha killed, as the Bodhisattva killed the one man on board, the merchant, because he didn't want him to create that type of suffering. So I'm not saying go kill your abuser. That's not the answer. My point is that you have to have some skill in knowing when it's the appropriate thing to do which. And for most of us, where we're at, we need to just get out of the situation because it's not good for us, but it's also not good for them. At some point for bodhisattvas, they're not concerned about what it's good for them or not. They're only concerned about the welfare of the other being. Does that make sense? Yeah, Alan.
So yes, and usual advice is extricate, and I do get there's actually wonderful Buddhists in preventing that other person from performing in ways.
Sure.
That's part of it. But you're generally not experiencing this in isolation. If that
Sure.
happens, it's within another, maybe a larger organization or community, and there might be other benefits that you are providing or they're providing.
Right.
Making those decisions to extricate yourself, when there's lots of other aspects.
And this is like the problem that people face if they're in an abusive relationship and there are children involved. How do you navigate all of that? But I think again, there's no easy answer to any of these things. I think this is why, once more, it's the two wings that we need: the compassion and the wisdom. You can be compassionate and have a kind of a idiot compassion or a blind compassion that isn't looking at the consequences of your actions. You always have to try to look at the consequences as best as you can, but that doesn't mean you're always going to do everything absolutely skillfully. But it's okay if we make mistakes. We just have to be guided by the best intention throughout all of this. Do what we can to continue moving in the right direction. But yeah, this gets into a whole other area of how everything becomes very much about the situation and about our ability within the situation, how we are seeing it, how we are assessing what's going to happen on the basis of our actions. But then do something within that to try to change it. But it may look very different for each of us in terms of if we were confronted with that. Sometimes when I'm working with students and they say, well, what would you do if you were in my situation? And I'm going, well, that's a nonsensical question, because I'm not in your situation and I'm a different person than you. I mean, so I can help other people to see the Dharma and how they might apply it, but it's still up to them and their own mind and their own, experience. I don't know. Yeah, Charlotte.
I'm really pulling this to a different context, a little bit lower one. Not bodhisattva, and not, because these are very strong words.
Sure,
allowing
sure.
the body to be abused. These are very strong.
Yeah.
Maybe in a more worldly context, though, my experience in life has been that just the level of quote-unquote abuse of having people speak to you harshly and criticize you and publicly criticize you, that's actually necessary to have the strength to take that for any group to get anything done. I don't know, there may be some wonderful leader somewhere in the world who only ever speaks kind words. And the whole organization only ever speaks kind words, and they can only use rewards to bring people along. But in my experience, I have one friend who happens to be a very famous TV actress. And at age 15, she had to give up the fact that people were going to write stuff about her in newspapers all the time.
Right.
Because I don't read negative reviews. I have to do that. Otherwise she couldn't have worked and she wouldn't have been successful. Similarly, in the organization, in my job sometimes, I work one-on-one with kids, and the mothers actually abuse us. They verbally call us up, yell at us, want to share their anxiety for hours. Will sometimes be rude and insulting when we're with them in the house. I had a mother last year who would run and watch Fox News and then run into the room where I was tutoring her are gonna say, and yell at me like, you think you're a teacher,
Yeah.
you're not really a teacher. If you are, you could answer these 6 questions right now.
Wow.
And she wouldn't
Pretty strong.
leave.
Yeah.
Yeah. So anyway, I'm just bringing it into a more worldly context. Sometimes we get, I think we tend to be very sensitive and careful about feelings around Dharma communities, and I love that.
Yeah.
But on the other hand,
Yeah, sometimes we do have to face that. Yeah.
to get things done in the world in institutions or to make money, just
Yeah.
a certain degree of toughness to specifically like harsh words and criticism is necessary. Anybody in a leadership position also has to accept criticism of the organization,
Sure.
necessarily of themselves, that's going to be a piece of it. So I'm sorry, it's a little
No.
bit of a different, I'm taking a
No,
different
no, no.
direction. But it's just
No, and it's worthwhile saying. And when we get to chapter 6, you can learn about patience. And, yeah, I mean, so, Shantideva does cover, everything in the end too, but it's a good point, driven by this, in particular, that we do have a lot of soft skin when it comes to things in our world, and we need to be a little bit capable of taking other things and not think that the whole world is supposed to be perfect and wonderful, everyone delightful, everyone smiling, and so, yeah, Richard.
I had a less fraught example that I was thinking of. I once saw Derek Jeter of the New York Yankees go after a fly ball that was going foul, and he was concentrating on the ball, running like crazy, and he literally ran into the seats, and caught the ball as he fell over 2 or 3 fans. And it was one of the most remarkable things I've ever seen in my life. I mean, in terms of sports. I'm not a sports person, but
Right.
I just happened to be watching this. Jacqueline, did you see that? It's like, saw you nodding. Yeah, you saw it. It was incredible. And the only reason he could pull it off, I mean, he was like covered in scratches and blood and everything. And the only reason he could pull it off was because he had the skillful means to be able to do that. He caught the fly ball, and he managed to do that. And unless I'm wrong, the kinds of things that are being spoken about here are, kind of like at the Derek Jeter level of spirituality.
To be able to do that type
in other
of...
words, I can't do this. I mean, but apropos Charlotte, I can certainly take a lot of abuse in terms of getting something done. But something like this is like, it's like mind-blowing with sort of the way Jeter was in that thing.
Yeah, we're going to see that there's going to be pretty high aspirations with a lot of these verses, and I'm going to talk in a bit when we get to after verse 20 about the reasons why we do that. Why do bodhisattvas, make it so extreme, like the Derek Jeter kind of things or whatever? Because it's an important part of our practice. I've already alluded to it a little bit, but I want to share a little of that. So let's go on to the next part, which is dedicating it to be the source of inexhaustible virtue. First, dedicating it to be only the cause of the welfare of others, our body and so on. So let's read, let's go ahead and read 15 CD and 16 and 17. When anyone encounters me, may it never be meaningless for him. If in those who encounter me a faithful or an angry mind arises, may that eternally become the cause for fulfilling all their aims. May all who say bad things to me or cause me any other harm, and those who mock and insult me, fortune to become enlightened. So I alluded to these verses earlier in response to the question Jennifer had. This is what we want to do, is we want to, no matter what they do, however negative they are, may we become the cause for their best happiness, for their enlightenment and so on. So first, 15 CD, the commentary at the top of page 7 of Gyaltsab Je says, may it never become the cause for sentient beings to be disappointed when they look to me for help. May I always be able to fulfill what they need. Then dedicating the thought as the cause for inexhaustibility, Gyaltsab Je says in regard to verse 16, regardless of whether it is a mind of anger or faith that has arisen. It's up to them. They can be completely angry at me, or they can look at me with, puppy dog eyes. And, whatever has arisen, directed at me, may become the cause that in all lifetimes, all their temporary and ultimate aims are achieved. So it's not contingent upon them. This is how I want to be for them, regardless of what they do. Then the last one that we read, may whoever affronts me verbally or otherwise, physically harms me or backstabs me, may all these actions become the cause for them to have the fortune of attaining the great enlightenment. You know, whoever tweets about me, whoever... So, again, very powerful sentiments. Then we have the next section dedicating it to be the cause of enjoyment. This is got a couple of sections. Let's read the 3 verses that start this out, 18, 19, and 20. May I be a protector for those without one, a helmsman for travelers, and a ship, a boat, and a bridge for all who wish to cross. May I be an island for those who seek one, and a lamp for those desiring one. May I be a bed for all who desire one, and a slave for all who want an embodied slave. May I be a wish-fulfilling jewel, a good vase, knowledge mantras that accomplish, and great medicine. May I become a wish-fulfilling tree and a wish-fulfilling cow for embodied beings. So these verses are these very powerful aspirations to become of incredible merit for others, that they may be able to have all the necessities that they desire by virtue of our being there. So this is where, I'm not going to go through the whole list that's on page 8 because it's just reiterating everything that we just talked about. But I want to talk about the purposes of such prayers of dedication. According to my teacher Geshe Jampa Gyatso in Italy, when he taught on this, he said that essentially these are all about accumulating vast merit. If we think in this way, that we want to become the cause for all of this, it's huge merit. May I become what all sentient beings need. If they need an island, may I be that island. If I want to be, if they need a boat, a ship, may I become that for them. If they need a car to be able to get across town, may I become that for them. Whatever. We want to become wish-fulfilling in every way so that sentient beings gain necessities, and by virtue of that you gain incredible merit. His Holiness the Dalai Lama, according to Geshe Yeshe Topten, and by the way, I would encourage you, if you want to do some reading on these chapters between now and whenever we get around to the next part, Geshe Yeshe Topten has a book that's been republished by Wisdom that's called Shantideva's Path of Awakening. And it's a commentary on all of it. It doesn't have the verses embedded in it, so it's a little difficult in that regard. You have to have multiple things that you're looking at. But Geshe Yeshe Topten says that when His Holiness was asked about why do bodhisattvas make such vast prayers that are seemingly impossible to ever manifest, right? How could one become all these things for other beings? He says it's to expand the mind of the bodhisattvas and encourage them on the path. And they will later on acquire the attitude of being able to do anything. It's like to increase our confidence and our potential to awaken that desire to be a benefit. Of course, Buddhas can manifest as anything. It's not to say that they couldn't be all these objects. When you become a Buddha, you can become whatever is needed by sentient beings. But nonetheless, these aspirations that the bodhisattvas are making is to encourage them, to give them this mind that really wants to achieve this for others. Think about all the happiness that beings would have if we were able to become all of this for them. And then, to have this attitude of being able to do anything. Let's go on to verse 21 and 22. Just like the great elements, such as earth and like space, may I always be many varieties of bases of sustenance for the boundless sentient beings. Likewise, until all attain nirvana, may I also be the source of sustenance for all the realms of sentient beings that reach unto the ends of space. So these 2 verses kind of bring to conclusion these sort of dedications for being able to do these vast beneficial results for beings. This first one we read was dedicating for time and expanse. Gyaltsub Je says, may I always become in many ways the cause for the necessities of the boundless sentient beings. Like the 4 elements of earth, water, fire, and wind are the basis for the actions of sentient beings. And similar to space, which is permanent. They're talking space here, I don't know, I was going to check this, but I didn't have time to do it. It says it's permanent. You have permanent and impermanent phenomena, permanent meaning unchanging. Usually space, when it's talked about as being permanent, is what we call uncompounded space, which is simply the negation of obstructive contact. So it's not like we're referring to some physical space, we're referring to the fact that everything is able to abide in space because there isn't obstructive contact. Even what these physical objects are there, you're dealing with a negation. And a negation, by definition, is a permanent phenomenon. Emptiness is a permanent phenomenon because it's a negation. But when we talk about the element, I always thought the element was talking about composed space, because like if we talk about this body, we can say the earth element is the kind of solid parts of it. The water are the more mobile parts that adhere together. Fire are the warm elements. Wind are the motility, and so on. And then the space are like the various cavernous parts of the body that, like our mouth and our ears and so on, and that are formed by virtue of things composing that space. Composed space seems to have more of an impermanent nature according to the more traditional teachings. But nonetheless, the idea here, regardless of all that, is that you become, just like the elements are a support for all beings, you want to be the support for them, to have whatever it is that they need. And there's a little quote from the Stacking of Jewels Sutra: Bodhisattvas work for the welfare of sentient beings like the 5 elements of earth, water, fire, wind, and space or air. So, okay, yeah, because I mean, it seems, I mean, now it's not space or air, wind is air, sorry. Space, again, they sometimes talk about 6 elements, which would be earth, water, fire, wind, space, and consciousness. And consciousness obviously is not a physical one that we can point to, but it is involved in the minds and experiences of sentient beings. Dedicating for uninterrupted continuum of object and time, Gyaltsab Je says, likewise, may I also become the cause for the livelihood of all the realms of sentient beings, which extend to the edge of space by benefiting them in infinite ways until they go beyond misery. So this is, like he says here, train the mind like this again and again. These are these thoughts that, the Bodhisattva generates. This is why Rinpoche tells us to recite these verses every day, because as His Holiness said, we can't do this yet, but we want to train our minds to be this way. We want to feel inspired so that we're able to do anything. We're able to make this life incredibly beneficial. So, all of this was a prelude to taking the Bodhisattva vows. The next 2 verses are the actual taking of the vows after having done the full 7-limb practice and had those auxiliary verses on generosity, dedication, and so on. Let's read verses 23 and 24. Just as the previous Sugatas generated the mind of enlightenment, and just as they dwelt in the trainings of a bodhisattva, likewise for the benefit of migrating beings, I shall generate the mind of enlightenment, and likewise I shall learn the trainings according to the stages. So these 2 verses can act as the means of actually taking the vows. As I mentioned yesterday, you cannot newly take the vows on your own. You have to have a preceptor, someone who is holding the vows to transmit them to you. And so then once you have taken them from at least one person, you can retake them from as many people as you wish if you feel connection with those gurus who are doing that. But then you can take them on your own from an image. So Gyaltsab Je says, when the previous Tathagatas generated the mind, they initially generated the supreme wishing bodhicitta in front of the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas. And then, to take the Bodhisattva vows, they generated the engaging bodhicitta, remembering the difference between these 2, that wishing precedes as that aspiration to become enlightened, and then once one takes the vows, you have engaging bodhicitta. Subsequently, they trained and remained in the gradual bodhisattva trainings. This is how one proceeds, is that you initially generate the aspiration, generate the engaging mind, and then you go about doing the actions of a bodhisattva, the trainings. Likewise, I, for the temporary and ultimate benefit of sentient beings, either in front of an actual preceptor with pure bodhisattva vows or in front of the invoked Buddhas and Bodhisattvas, upon the request for attention, shall generate the wishing mind of enlightenment. Likewise, I shall train and remain in the gradual trainings upon having generated the engaging mind. So you really can't have engaging mind without aspiring mind, right? It doesn't make any sense that you would set about taking the bodhisattva vows and engaging in the trainings without having the aspiration to go on that path initially. Repeat the verses 3 times, either after the preceptor or, if there is none, after the invoked Buddhas and Bodhisattvas, which, again, if there is none, is only for those who have taken them previously before on the support of a being who can confer those vows. And not everybody in the FPMT can give these vows. There are some monastics, and I think even maybe a few lay people who can give bodhisattva vows. I'm not sure. I know some people who've been going into the prisons who were allowed to do that. Venerable Rabina checked to see if I could give refuge and found out that I couldn't, and that was perfectly fine with me. I didn't want that responsibility. But nonetheless, some people that go into prisons, because prisoners don't have the opportunity always to meet, ordained folks necessarily, or certainly gurus, lamas that might be able to confer the vows to them. They might take them from others, but then it says the meaning of training gradually. It is explained to us, which was mentioned in the verse, right? To train step by step or gradually in the trainings. In ours it said learn the trainings according to the stages. Practices like the generosity of one's body should not be done with an impure mind, otherwise it becomes a fault. It should be done when it does not become a fault and rather becomes a great accumulation of merit. I mentioned this earlier, right? And as it says in the footnote, in general, it is prohibited for bodhisattvas to practice generosity with their body before the path of seeing. This point is also made in the chapter on enthusiasm, the 7th chapter, verse 25. So you train in this until you get to a point where you don't have any attachment. It's at the path of seeing, on the first ground, that the bodhisattva perfects generosity, which means that they can gladly give their body to any being with no remorse whatsoever, no impure thought. Happily giving that. So obviously, that's a pretty high level of accomplishment. So that isn't the training we're being encouraged to engage in. We have to get to that gradually. Some opponents posit as the meaning of sequential training that one trains sequentially in the 3 moralities. The morality of restraint, we're going to see these in terms of the chapter on morality, chapter 5, guarding alertness and so on. Restraint means to restrain from engaging in the negative actions. The morality of building up virtue, which would be engage in those that are virtuous. And the morality of benefiting others, which is specific to the bodhisattva, that is always intent upon their actions and their morality benefiting others. According to boundary. This is incorrect. You don't sequentially train in each of these. You finish the morality of restraint, and then you go on to the morality of building up virtue, and then you go on to the morality of benefiting others. You practice them all simultaneously as best as you can. Others posit the meaning as having a separate ceremony for the generation of the engaging mind and the engaging vows. This is also incorrect according to any of the great pioneers. You do them both at the same time. You get the engaging mind with the engaging vows. There's no separate ceremony for those. So there's lots of these different things, I guess, that are, points that Gyaltsab J felt he needed to address. To take the engaging mind after having first taken the wishing mind and then training in the wish to practice the perfections is the supreme method that accords with the differences in different persons. It is also suitable to take the 2 minds sequentially in one ceremony. But the wishing mind has to precede the engaging mind. The way of taking them and so forth one can know from the earlier mentioned treatises of great teachers. I shall not elaborate on it here. So there are instructions about how to take them. I think in the text that by Abbot Drukpa Gyaltsen, they went into those. They also, of course, went into the full bodhisattva vows. I've given you a listing from the book that's called the Bodhisattva Vow by Geshe Sonam Rinchen, that you can find those listed. That's pages 9 and 10, or even through 11 of your handout. And I'm not going to go through those, obviously. I will be happy to send on to Loren or somebody the link to the teachings I've given on them. I'm not saying my teachings are anything great. Don't take that the wrong way. But if you desire to go through them, as I said, I think there's like 13 or 14 2-hour sessions roughly that go into each of these. I have to say Jennifer very kindly found the commentary by Lama Tsongkhapa on the Sangha's Bodhisattva Bhumi, so I'm looking forward to working with that, and maybe I'll teach it again with that in hand. But nonetheless, know that there's extensive commentary available on these. Even in the book that's mentioned there, the Bodhisattva Vow by Geshe Sonam Rinchen, he does go into more detail than a lot of the texts do, certainly than what the FPMT's booklet does. I think many of you have the FPMT booklet if you've taken the Bodhisattva vows. Yes? No? Maybe? Maybe I'll make sure people have a link to that because it is available. All right. Any questions on taking the vows, what that's all about? again, good to study them, good to be aware of what's involved in them before, because you can do that. When you get to tantric vows, you can't do that. They're secret vows. You don't know them until you take them. So not a good, not that easy for people to do, but this is easy. You can practice these and learn about these. Okay, 6 minutes, 5 minutes, 3 minutes. I don't know how many minutes it is. Let's go through this next section, and this I think we can go through fairly quickly because this is just some rejoicing at the end of this, the conclusion, which is rejoicing and inducing others to rejoice. Rejoicing by eulogizing the mind. Let's read 25, 26, and 27, actually all the way through 28. Those intelligent ones have concluded lucidly seizing the mind of enlightenment in this way, but in order to increase it, they should highly praise it in the following manner. Now my life is fruitful. I have attained a good human existence. Today I have been born in the Buddha lineage. I have become a child of the Buddha. Now, whatever happens, I will act to not sully this flawless, holy Buddha lineage, initiating actions concordant with this lineage. Just like a blind man discovering a jewel in a heap of rubbish, likewise, by some coincidence, this mind of enlightenment has been born within me. So this is the first few topics around rejoicing. Gyaltsab says in regard to the first two verses we read, after the wise bodhisattvas have taken the two bodhicittas with a very clear, joyful mind and faith, they engage into methods for it to not degenerate and to increase its practice. Towards this end, they generate joy and praise the mind, this rejoicing type of mentality we spoke of earlier. If we explain how, then it is today when I generated the mind and took the vows, my life has become fruitful. My human existence was well attained and the freedoms and endowments became meaningful. Today I was born into the family of the Buddha and became a bodhisattva. The meditation on joy, thinking now I have become a child of the Buddhas, relates to the wish, when have I finally become a bodhisattva? Well, now you have, well, it's not to say again that you are a card-carrying bodhisattva, but you are definitely a, bodhisattva of intention, wanting to move in that direction. Then the 27th verse, if it is asked whether this alone is enough, no, from now on I shall engage into actions of the three doors that befit the family of the Buddha. I shall strive in the method in a way that does not sully this holy lineage, which is adorned only by qualities and is faultless in the beginning, middle, and end, with the faults and downfalls of the wishing and engaging advice. So, we're trying to maintain that pure practice, having taken the vows. The vows isn't just about, okay, now I just do everything I was doing while holding these vows. You have to engage in the activities that the vows are encouraging you to practice. And then finally, rejoicing because of having created a rare mind. This is this idea of this blind person finding this jewel in the heap of rubbish. This mind of enlightenment was born from me by pure chance, just like a poor and destitute blind person finding a jewel on a heap of rubbish by sheer coincidence. It must have been through the force of the Buddhas. So we can, give credit to the Buddhas that we have found this very precious mind, that we're able to practice this. And then in terms of achieving the purpose of others, we just looked at achieving one's own purpose. Let's read 29 through 33. Why not? This is what His Holiness does at the end of teachings, right? When he hasn't done the commentary on all of them. This is also the supreme ambrosia that overcomes the Lord of Death of migrating beings. This is also the inexhaustible treasure that eliminates all poverty of migrating beings. This is the supreme medicine that quells the disease of migrating beings too. It is the tree of rest for migrating beings, wandering and weary on the path of conditioned existence. It is the universal platform that leads all migrating beings to freedom from the bad migrations, that dispels the torment of afflictions of migrating beings. It is the great sun that annihilates the cataracts of ignorance of migrating beings. It is the quintessential butter from the churning of the milk of the holy Dharma. For all those guests who are migrating beings, journeying on the path of cyclic existence, who wish to utilize the resources of happiness, this will place the great travelers of sentient beings in supreme happiness and satisfy them. So just so you know, and what I would encourage you to do after today, you don't have to do it tonight, but sometime soon, I have a little bit of the last part of the handout, the bottom of page 11. It breaks this down into the 3 categories that bodhicitta is able to dispel the suffering of sentient beings and gives these various examples that we just went through. Then at the next section on page 12 says bodhicitta is able to dispel the obscurations, which are the cause of suffering. So not only the suffering of beings, but the causes of their suffering. And then finally, the last bits, which were like the last verse and a half that we read, bodhicitta is able to accomplish all benefit and happiness, that it's able to, immediately bring, or eventually bring all sentient beings to the perfect happiness that they desire. So I don't know if I have time. I don't want to keep everyone late. We're already at 5 o'clock, but those you might read through then to what Gyaltsab says. I think this is extremely self-explanatory. I don't know that I need to give any great commentary or anything. Not that I'm giving great commentary to begin with, but let's go on then to, by the way, this at the top of page 14, where it talks about that butter essence, which we called it quintessential butter, I think, in our translation. It says from churning the wood of wisdom. It's like a wooden churn. It's not the churning the wood of wisdom. I don't know. It sounds strange to me. But anyway, let's read verse 34, which is inducing others to rejoice. This was all about our rejoicing in all of the benefits of this and taking the Bodhisattva vow. Let's read verse 34. Today, in the presence of all the protectors, I invite the migrating beings to be guests in happiness until they attain the state of Sugata. May gods, anti-gods, and so forth be joyful. So I'll read the last little bit that Gyaltsab says on this. He says, today, in front of all the protectors who are the conquerors and their children, I have served migrators the hospitality of a Sugata who completes all ultimate benefit and happiness, and I have also offered the satisfaction of the intermediate happiness of gods and humans until they attain that state. As such, I have offered the supreme of hospitality, and from today onwards, the gods, demigods, serpent kings, and so forth should be happy. This is to generate rejoicing in others, that they should also rejoice at this having occurred. So then he goes on to conclude by saying, preceding the generation of the 2 minds as explained in this commentary, understand that mind generation upon having purified the disrupting conditions of the obscurations and building up the conducive conditions of the accumulations of merit is the supreme way to take the essence of the precious human rebirth with freedoms and endowments and strive in it. So then the summarizing verse on the last page 15, they who understand they have attained a human rebirth with freedoms and endowments should strive in generating the 2 bodhicittas, the essential meaning of all the teachings of the conquerors, the sole path traversed by the tens of millions of their children. So Gyaltsab is giving us that kind of encouragement at the end of all this, that we should take this very seriously about purifying negativities, accumulating merit through the 7 limbs, through all of our practices, and strive to achieve the 2 bodhicittas, the wishing mind and the engaging mind, because of the benefits he spoke of in the first chapter. So I think that did it justice, but I apologize if it didn't by virtue of hurrying up at the end here, but I felt it was important that we touch on all the verses, so good.